Welcome to another exciting episode on Harry FLAX. Today, we're exploring a captivating tale called What If Female Loki Obsessively Watched Harry since age 6 and Broke into Hogwarts for Dumbledore's 17 Lies. Before we begin, if you enjoy our content, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It helps more than you know. And now, the story awaits. Chapter 1, The Watcher Between Worlds. Lokia was bored. Catastrophically, dangerously bored. The kind of bored that had once led her to cut off all of Sif's golden hair in her sleep. The kind of bored that had resulted in her binding Heimdall's all-seeing eyes for 3 days, leaving Asgard temporarily blind to external threats. The kind of bored that typically preceded chaos. She lounged across the arm of her father's throne. Odin was away on diplomatic business in Vanaheim, one leg swinging lazily as she conjured small illusions between her fingers. Tiny dragons chased each other through the air before dissolving into emerald smoke. "If you're quite finished desecrating the Allfather's seat," Thor's voice boomed from the entrance, "there are warriors waiting to train with you in the yard." Lokia rolled her eyes, not bothering to look at her brother. "Training with your friends consists of them swinging hammers at me while I dodge. It hardly qualifies as stimulating." "You could swing something back," Thor suggested, approaching with heavy footsteps. "And perpetuate the myth that brute force solves problems." She finally looked at him, cocking an eyebrow. "I think not." Thor sighed, reaching the throne and crossing his arms. Despite his frustration, affection softened his features. "What troubles you, sister? You've been restless for weeks." "This realm troubles me," Lokia admitted, swinging herself upright. "The same halls, the same faces, the same tiresome politics for centuries upon centuries. Don't you ever feel the universe is larger than Asgard's golden walls?" "There are 8 other realms, 9 realms we've known since childhood," she interrupted. "Predictable, mapped, catalogued. But the multiverse, Thor, there are pathways between worlds that even Heimdall cannot see." Thor's brow furrowed with concern. "Lokia, father forbade exploration of uncharted pathways after your last adventure." She grinned at the memory. Her adventure had involved slipping between dimensional cracks into a realm of sentient shadows who'd nearly followed her back to Asgard before she'd sealed the breach. Odin had been livid, but the thrill had sustained her for decades. "Perhaps I need a new adventure," she mused, rising from the throne in a fluid motion. Her green and black leather armor materialized around her as she stood, replacing the casual tunic she'd worn. Thor reached for her arm. "Sister," Lokia vanished beneath his grasp, reappearing across the throne room with a laugh. "Don't wait up, brother dear. I'll be back before anyone important notices I'm gone." Before Thor could respond, she twisted her hands in an intricate pattern, creating a shimmer in the air, a concealed pathway between dimensions that she alone could see. With a final wink at her brother's exasperated face, Lokia stepped sideways into nothing, the throne room disappearing behind her. The paths between worlds resembled nothing so much as walking through liquid crystal. Lights and shadows flowed around her, refracting possibilities of realities she could choose to enter. Lokia moved confidently through the void space, her fingertips occasionally brushing against the membrane of a world that caught her interest. "Too primitive," she muttered, passing by a realm where creatures with too many limbs dragged themselves across a volcanic landscape. "Too boring," she decided about another where beings of pure light floated in meditative silence. She'd nearly decided to explore a promising underwater civilization when she felt it, a ripple of magic so unusual that it sent shivers across her skin. Peculiar magic wasn't uncommon in her travels, but this had a distinctive quality, raw, untrained, yet extraordinarily potent. And it had the flavor of humanity. Midgard wasn't known for significant magical development. The humans Thor was so fond of typically possessed little more than superstition and parlor tricks that barely qualified as true sorcery. Yet this was different. Lokia changed course, following the magical signature like a beacon. The space between realities thinned, and she pressed her palm against the membrane separating her from its source. With a whispered word in ancient Asgardian, she opened a window rather than a door, allowing herself to observe without physically entering the realm. Through her viewing portal, she saw an ordinary-looking human dwelling on an ordinary-looking street. Privet Drive, read a sign visible from her vantage point. The houses were identical, lined up in boring precision that made Lokia's lip curl with distaste. But the magic, it pulsed from inside one of those identical houses, fluctuating with what felt like emotion. Lokia narrowed her focus, her window shifting to peer inside number 4. What she found was unexpectedly small. A child. A human boy no more than 6 years old, with unruly black hair and startlingly green eyes behind broken spectacles. He sat hunched in a cupboard, of all places, his small hand pressed against a spider bite on his arm. As she watched, the angry red welt visibly receded, healing itself before her eyes. Fascinating, Lokia murmured, leaning closer to her viewing portal. The boy looked around nervously, as though afraid of being discovered. His lips moved in a near-silent whisper, "Please get better, please get better." Unconscious magic, responding to need rather than deliberate casting. Primitive, yes, but the raw power behind it was anything but ordinary. A thundering of footsteps from above made the boy flinch. He quickly pulled down his sleeve, assuming a neutral expression just as the cupboard door was yanked open. A horse-faced woman glared down at him. "Out! The bacon needs cooking, and if you burn it again, you'll go without breakfast entirely." "Yes, Aunt Petunia," the boy said quietly, climbing out of what Lokia now realized was actually his bedroom. She watched as the small child stood on a stool to reach the stove, handling hot pans with the careful precision of someone who had been burned before. The contrast between his obvious magical potential and his mundane servitude was jarring. "What's your name, little sorcerer?" Lokia wondered aloud, though he couldn't hear her through the dimensional barrier. Her answer came moments later when a massive man with a walrus mustache entered the kitchen, cuffing the boy lightly on the back of the head. "Mind you don't splash grease on my paper, Potter," the man growled. Potter. An unremarkable name for a remarkably magical child. The boy, Potter, finished cooking without incident and served the family, the horse-faced woman, the walrus man, and a round boy approximately Potter's age who received 3 times the portion. Potter himself was given a single piece of bacon and a small serving of eggs, which he ate quickly while standing in the corner of the kitchen. Lokia had seen enough casual cruelty in her centuries of life that this minor mistreatment hardly registered as significant. Yet something about the quiet dignity with which the small boy accepted his situation stirred an unfamiliar feeling in her chest. A moment later, she identified it with surprise: kinship. The boy didn't belong here among these magicless, dull creatures any more than Lokia belonged among Asgard's hammer-swinging warriors. He was something different, something potentially extraordinary, trapped in ordinary circumstances. More interesting than kinship, however, was curiosity. What sort of magic would this child grow to command? And why was he living with these obviously non-magical humans who treated him as a servant? Lokia closed her viewing portal with a gesture, then reopened it above the house, expanding her perspective. She could sense protective magic surrounding the property, ancient, intricate spellwork that had nothing to do with the boy's untrained abilities. Someone had placed safeguards around this home, which meant someone knew of the boy's importance. "Curiouser and curiouser," she murmured, borrowing a phrase from a Midgardian story she'd once read during a previous visit. Lokia made a decision. She would watch this boy, this Potter, and see what became of him. A diversion, at the very least, from Asgardian tedium. She settled herself comfortably in the void space, preparing for extended observation. Thor would be annoyed at her prolonged absence, but he would survive. This was far too interesting to abandon. Over the following weeks, Lokia's casual interest evolved into genuine fascination. The boy, whose full name she learned was Harry Potter, lived a life of persistent neglect punctuated by moments of accidental magic that he struggled to hide from his relatives. She watched him regrow his hair overnight after a particularly hideous haircut from his aunt. She observed him somehow appearing on the school roof while running from his cousin's gang. She witnessed colors changing, objects moving, and glass vanishing, all without conscious control, all followed by punishment from his oblivious guardians. "They're afraid of you," Lokia commented one afternoon, watching from her viewing portal as Harry scrubbed the kitchen floor after being blamed for a vase his cousin had broken. "They don't know what you are, but they sense you're different." The boy couldn't hear her, of course, but speaking aloud had become a habit during her observations. It helped her process the strange dynamics of this household. 3 months into her watching, Lokia's patience with the Dursleys' treatment of Harry reached its limit. It wasn't compassion that motivated her, gods rarely concern themselves with human suffering, but rather indignation at seeing raw magical talent so thoroughly suppressed. A little mischief seems warranted, she decided, after witnessing Harry being locked in his cupboard for 3 days after an incident involving a teacher's wig turning blue. For the first time, Lokia didn't just watch, she acted. Maintaining her position between dimensions, she extended a tendril of magic through her viewing portal, touching the lock on Harry's cupboard door. With a whispered word, the lock mechanism melted into useless metal. When Vernon Dursley discovered the damaged lock the next morning, his face turned an impressive shade of purple. His accusations fell on deaf ears, as no one could explain how the metal had liquefied without heat or acid. Lokia laughed delightedly at the confusion she'd caused. More importantly, she noted how Harry, though confused, seized the opportunity to sneak food from the kitchen during his unexpected freedom. "You're welcome, little sorcerer," she said, pleased with herself. After that first intervention, Lokia found herself occasionally nudging circumstances in Harry's favor. Nothing dramatic enough to draw attention from whatever magical authorities might be watching, just small tricks to make his life marginally more bearable. When Dudley and his friends pursued Harry hunting, she would create illusory sounds to misdirect them. When Petunia deliberately gave Harry 2 large shoes that made him stumble, Lokia enchanted them to shrink gradually to the correct size. When Vernon locked Harry's schoolbooks in the garden shed, she ensured the lock would mysteriously fail whenever Harry approached. She told herself these minor interventions were merely to keep her entertainment viable. A boy whose spirit was completely crushed would hardly be interesting to observe. But part of her recognized a more troubling truth: she was becoming invested in this human child's welfare. A year passed, then another. Lokia maintained her vigil, though not continuously. She returned to Asgard periodically, deflecting Thor's questions and enduring Odin's suspicious glares with practiced innocence. Neither her father nor brother could prove she was doing anything forbidden, though both clearly suspected she was up to something. "Your disappearances grow more frequent," Odin remarked during a private dinner. "Should I be concerned about which realm you're destabilizing?" "I'm merely broadening my education," Lokia replied smoothly. "Isn't that what you've always encouraged? Knowledge before action." "Knowledge for Asgard's benefit," Odin countered. "Not for your amusement." Lokia merely smiled and sipped her wine. The All-Father needn't know that her amusement involved watching a human child grow into his magic. Some secrets were worth keeping, even from those with supposedly all-seeing eyes. When she returned to her observation point after these Asgardian interludes, she always found Harry exactly as she'd left him, surviving, enduring, occasionally flourishing despite his circumstances. The resilience of the boy impressed her, though she would never have admitted such sentiment about a mortal. And then, shortly before Harry's 11th birthday, everything changed. The first letter arrived with the morning post, and Lokia watched with keen interest as Vernon Dursley's face contorted with horror upon seeing the address, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. "Someone knows precisely where you sleep," Lokia observed, leaning closer to her viewing portal. "How interesting." What followed was a comedy of errors as the Dursleys attempted to outrun the mysteriously persistent letters. Lokia found herself laughing uncontrollably as owls descended on the family's Sunday breakfast, as letters poured from the chimney, as Vernon Dursley drove his family to an isolated hut on a rock in the sea. "Fascinating magical system they have," she mused, watching hundreds of letters find their target regardless of concealment. persistent and adaptive. I wonder who's behind it. Her answer came in the form of an enormous bearded man who crashed through the door of the seaside hut precisely at midnight on Harry's birthday. Lokia observed with delight as the giant revealed the truth to Harry. He was a wizard, famous in a hidden magical society, and invited to attend a school called Hogwarts. So that's what you are, Lokia whispered. A wizard. How charmingly provincial. The revelation of Harry's parents' murder, not a car crash as he'd been told, and his apparent role in defeating a dark wizard as an infant raised far more questions than it answered. Lokia found herself intrigued by this hidden magical society existing alongside ordinary humans, operating with its own rules, history, and conflicts. When Hagrid, as the giant called himself, took Harry shopping in a hidden magical district called Diagon Alley, Lokia didn't hesitate to follow. She shifted her viewing portal, maintaining her position between dimensions while observing Harry's wide-eyed introduction to his heritage. The wizarding world was both impressive and absurd to her godly perspective. Their magic seemed simultaneously powerful and limited, dependent on wands, incantations, and rigid methodology rather than the intuitive manipulation of fundamental forces that Asgardians practiced. Still, she couldn't deny feeling a spark of excitement as Harry purchased his first wand, especially when the wand maker spoke cryptically about its connection to the wizard who had murdered Harry's parents. Curious, very curious. Sorry, said Harry, but what's curious? I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every single wand. It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand, gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, why, its brother gave you that scar. Lokia raised an eyebrow. Now that is intriguing. Linked by fate to your would-be killer, are you, little wizard? Perhaps you're more interesting than I realized. The shopping expedition yielded books, which Harry eagerly devoured once back at the Dursleys. Lokia found herself reading over his shoulder, absorbing information about this hidden society, its history, customs, and the conflict that had claimed Harry's parents. Most fascinating was Harry's apparent status as the boy who lived, a celebrity for surviving an attack that had killed countless others, including his parents. The wizarding world had myths about him, expectations for him, none of which aligned with the neglected child she'd been watching for years. They don't know you at all, do they? She mused, watching Harry read by flashlight under his blanket. They've created a legend while the real boy slept in a cupboard. When September 1st arrived and Harry departed for Hogwarts, Lokia faced a choice. Her casual observation had evolved into something more committed. Did she abandon her watching now that Harry was entering a magical environment where he would presumably be safer and happier? Or did she follow this thread further? The answer was obvious. She was far too invested to stop now. Following Harry to Hogwarts presented new challenges. The ancient castle thrummed with protective magic significantly more sophisticated than the wards around Privet Drive. Lokia had to adjust her viewing technique, carefully weaving between existing magical barriers without disrupting them. What she found inside the castle both impressed and concerned her. Harry quickly made friends, a red-headed boy named Ron Weasley and a bossy girl called Hermione Granger. He discovered a talent for flying that earned him a place on his house Quidditch team. He attended classes, learned spells, and gradually began to find his place in this new world. But beneath the wonder, Lokia sensed currents of danger. A three-headed dog guarding a trapdoor. A professor who triggered Harry's scar to burn with pain. Whispered conversations about a philosopher's stone and Nicholas Flamel. And overseeing it all, a headmaster named Albus Dumbledore, whose twinkling eyes seemed to hide calculations behind their benevolent facade. He's testing you, Lokia realized, watching Dumbledore interact with Harry at a distance, offering cryptic guidance while withholding critical information. But for what purpose? The pattern became clearer as the school year progressed. Harry and his friends investigated mysteries that no children should have been allowed to pursue. They faced dangers that should have been handled by adults. And through it all, Dumbledore watched and waited, intervening only at the final moment. When Harry faced the possessed Professor Quirrell in the chamber beneath the trapdoor, Lokia nearly broke her rule of non-intervention. Watching an 11-year-old boy confront the fragmented soul of his parents' murderer tested even her detached curiosity. At the critical moment, when Quirrell's hands burned at Harry's touch and the boy himself was losing consciousness, Lokia sent the smallest thread of magic through her viewing portal, not enough to be detected by the powerful wizards present, just enough to boost Harry's instinctive defense. His natural protection, apparently left by his mother's sacrifice, flared brighter with this subtle reinforcement. "That's it, little wizard," she whispered. "Use what's already within you." When Dumbledore arrived seconds later, even his powerful magic couldn't detect Lokia's subtle enhancement of Harry's own protective spell. The headmaster believed, as did Harry himself, that the protection had worked entirely on its own. In the hospital wing afterward, Lokia listened intently to Dumbledore's explanations to Harry. The old wizard revealed just enough to satisfy immediate questions while clearly withholding deeper truths. "Your mother died to save you," Dumbledore explained. "If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark, to have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." The explanation seemed genuine, yet incomplete. Dumbledore's eyes held secrets, calculations, plans within plans. "He's not telling you everything," Lokia told the unconscious Harry later that night. "There's more to your connection with this Voldemort than he's revealed." The school year ended with accolades for Harry and his friends, with Gryffindor winning the House Cup, with apparent triumph. But Lokia had seen enough to be concerned about what lay beneath Hogwarts' magical facade. Summer brought Harry back to Privet Drive, where the Dursleys, now afraid of his magical abilities, treated him with fearful distance rather than active cruelty. Lokia continued her observation, noting how Harry's experiences had changed him. He stood straighter. He spoke more confidently. He had friends now, and knowledge of his true heritage. But he was also troubled by nightmares of Quirrell and Voldemort. He wrote letters to friends who mysteriously didn't respond. And he counted days until his return to Hogwarts with the desperation of someone escaping imprisonment. When a house elf named Dobby appeared in Harry's bedroom with warnings about returning to Hogwarts, Lokia's suspicions deepened. "Great danger," the creature insisted, his tennis ball eyes wide with fear. "Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts." The elf's subsequent sabotage, using magic in the house to get Harry in trouble with both his relatives and the wizarding authorities, was an interesting tactic, if ultimately unsuccessful. Lokia found herself admiring the creature's determination, even as she questioned his methods. The Weasley family's rescue of Harry in a flying car provided welcome comic relief, though Lokia noted how easily Harry left with virtual strangers. His trust, born of desperation, could someday be exploited by less benevolent forces. At the Weasleys' home, the Burrow, Lokia observed a loving magical family for the first time. The contrast between this chaotic, affectionate household and the sterile environment of Privet Drive was stark. Here, Harry blossomed, accepted for exactly who he was rather than punished for his differences. "This is how you should have been raised from the beginning," Lokia remarked, watching Harry engage in a boisterous food fight with the Weasley children. "So why weren't you?" That question led her back to Dumbledore. As headmaster, he'd clearly been involved in placing Harry with his relatives after his parents' deaths. What purpose had that served? Protection from remaining followers of Voldemort? Or something more manipulative, ensuring Harry would be grateful for any kindness, desperate for acceptance in the wizarding world? When Harry returned to Hogwarts for his second year, Lokia paid closer attention to the headmaster, noting his selective interventions and strategic absences. A pattern emerged of allowing Harry to face challenges that seemed designed to test specific qualities, courage, loyalty, resourcefulness, while providing just enough guidance to prevent outright disaster. The Chamber of Secrets crisis provided the most compelling evidence of Dumbledore's methods. Despite a monster petrifying students, despite Harry hearing voices in the walls, despite clear indicators that the situation involved rare magical abilities like Parseltongue, the headmaster maintained a puzzling distance until circumstances forced his removal from the school. He knew, Lokia realized, watching Dumbledore's careful non-answers to direct questions. He suspected what the chamber contained, who might be controlling it, and he still left children to solve it. When Harry descended into the chamber itself to rescue Ginny Weasley, Lokia again faced the temptation to intervene directly. The basilisk was a formidable opponent even for an adult wizard, let alone a 12-year-old boy. But intervention proved unnecessary. The appearance of Fawkes with the sorting hat, delivering exactly the tools Harry needed at precisely the right moment, suggested Dumbledore's invisible hand at work. The headmaster had provided means for Harry to triumph rather than direct protection, a telling choice. After the chamber incident, when Harry sat in Dumbledore's office recounting his confrontation with the memory of Tom Riddle, Lokia observed the headmaster's reaction closely. Behind his grandfatherly demeanor, calculations were clearly taking place. Each revelation about Harry's similarities to Voldemort, the Parseltongue ability, their half-blood status, their orphan childhoods, seemed to confirm something Dumbledore already suspected. "I don't think you're like him at all," Dumbledore told Harry when the boy expressed his concerns. But his eyes said something different, something that made Lokia's instincts prickle with warning. There was a connection between Harry and Voldemort that went beyond coincidence or parallel life paths, and Dumbledore knew exactly what it was. "You're keeping secrets that could get him killed," Lokia addressed the headmaster through her viewing portal, though he couldn't hear her. "What gives you the right?" By the end of Harry's second year at Hogwarts, Lokia had compiled a mental list of discrepancies in Dumbledore's statements, suspicious coincidences, and moments where crucial information had been withheld. The pattern suggested not just caution or age-appropriate filtering of difficult truths, but a deliberate strategy of manipulation. Returning to the void space between dimensions, Lokia made a decision. Mere observation was no longer sufficient. She needed to get closer, to access information that wasn't available from a distance, to understand what game Dumbledore was playing with Harry's life. "It seems, little wizard," she said to Harry's image in her final viewing portal of the term, "that your headmaster has been lying to you. And I intend to discover exactly what those lies conceal." As Harry boarded the Hogwarts Express to return to London for the summer, Lokia closed her viewing portal and began crafting a plan. Next term, she wouldn't just be watching Hogwarts from the dimensional in-between. She would be inside its walls. Summer crawled by with excruciating slowness. Harry returned to Privet Drive, where his situation had marginally improved thanks to the Dursleys' fear of his murderous godfather, Sirius Black. The discovery of this godfather, escaped from wizard prison and allegedly responsible for betraying Harry's parents, added yet another layer to the mystery surrounding Harry's life. Lokia divided her time between watching Harry and researching the wizarding world more thoroughly. She slipped between dimensions to observe magical libraries, eavesdrop on Ministry of Magic conversations, and compile information that would allow her to create a convincing cover identity. During a brief return to Asgard, she borrowed several magical artifacts from Odin's vault that would help conceal her divine nature while in the wizarding world. Her father would be furious if he discovered the theft, but Lokia had always excelled at hiding her tracks. "Another research expedition?" Thor asked skeptically when he found her packing. "Something like that," Lokia replied with a cryptic smile. "Don't worry, brother. I'm not starting any wars or toppling any regimes this time." Thor sighed. "That's hardly reassuring coming from you." She patted his cheek condescendingly. "Your lack of faith wounds me deeply." Before Thor could respond, she had vanished, leaving only a shimmer of green light behind. Back in her void space observation point, Lokia finalized her preparations. She had crafted an identity as Lyra Blackwood, a transfer student from a small, exclusive magical academy in Norway. Her backstory included enough verifiable details to withstand casual scrutiny, while remaining vague enough that deeper investigation would lead to magically created records she had planted in various archives. The timing was perfect. With Sirius Black's escape dominating wizarding attention and extra security measures being implemented at Hogwarts, the addition of one transfer student would hardly register as significant. As September 1st approached, Lokia watched Harry accidentally inflate his aunt, flee to the leaky cauldron, and learn about Black's alleged vendetta against him. Each development reinforced her determination to understand the web of manipulation surrounding the boy. On the morning that students were to board the Hogwarts Express, Lokia made her final preparations. She assumed her chosen form, a 17-year-old witch with dark hair and eyes that shifted between blue and green depending on the light. Her Asgardian armor was replaced by standard wizarding robes, and Odin's artifacts were carefully concealed within an enchanted trunk. For the first time in over 5 years of watching, Lokia prepared to step fully into Harry Potter's world rather than observing from between dimensions. With a gesture more dramatic than necessary, she had always appreciated theatrics. She opened a portal directly onto platform 9 3/4 and stepped through, leaving the void space behind. The noise and steam of the platform engulfed her immediately, parents calling last-minute instructions, owls hooting in cages, the rumble of the Scarlet steam engine. Lokia, now Lyra Blackwood, took a deep breath of physically present air and smiled. "Let the game begin," she murmured, striding confidently toward the Hogwarts Express. As the train pulled away from the station, Lokia settled into an empty compartment, casting subtle wards to ensure privacy. From her pocket, she withdrew a small crystal sphere, one of Odin's artifacts, and whispered an activation spell. The sphere glowed briefly, then projected a list in shimmering green light: Dumbledore's suspected deceptions, the true purpose of Harry's placement with abusive relatives, the complete prophecy regarding Harry and Voldemort, the connection between Harry's scar and Voldemort's powers, deliberate testing of Harry through controlled dangers, prior knowledge of the Chamber of Secrets, the real story behind Sirius Black's imprisonment. 6 confirmed suspicions, Lokia murmured. "Let's see how many more I can uncover." The train jolted, the lights flickered, and an unnatural cold began seeping into the compartment. Lokia sensed the approach of magical creatures, Dementors, according to her research, guards of the wizard prison Azkaban. Quickly pocketing the crystal sphere, she prepared to confront these creatures whose powers reportedly included forcing victims to relive their worst memories. As a goddess with centuries of complicated experiences, she had no intention of allowing such intrusion into her mind. The compartment door slid open, revealing a hooded figure whose rattling breath crystallized the air. Before it could fully enter, Lokia raised her hand, green energy crackling between her fingers. "I think not," she said pleasantly, releasing a pulse of Asgardian magic that forced the creature back. The Dementor paused, seemingly confused by magic it couldn't identify. After a moment of hesitation, it drifted away toward other compartments. Lokia smiled to herself. This should be an entertaining year indeed. From further down the train, she heard shouting. Recognizing Harry's voice even at a distance, she rose and moved toward the commotion, ready to begin the next phase of her mission, direct contact. It was time to discover what Albus Dumbledore was hiding, and why. Chapter 2, Tricks and Truths. The Great Hall buzzed with excited chatter as students filtered in for the welcome feast. Lokia, now fully embodying her Lyra Blackwood persona, stood in the shadows of the entrance hall, observing. After briefly dealing with the Dementor on the train, she'd kept her distance from Harry, choosing to watch rather than immediately introduce herself. Timing was everything. McGonagall spotted her almost immediately, striding over with efficient steps. "Miss Blackwood. I'm Professor McGonagall. Headmaster Dumbledore informed us of your transfer. You'll be sorted after the first years." "Lovely to meet you," Lokia replied with practiced politeness, her Norwegian accent perfectly calibrated, noticeable but not exaggerated. "I'm excited to experience Hogwarts' famous sorting ceremony." McGonagall nodded briskly. "Wait here. I'll return after I've collected the first years." The moment McGonagall disappeared, Lokia slipped away from her designated waiting spot. No sense wasting perfectly good snooping time. She moved silently through the entrance hall, extending her senses to locate Harry. She found him being escorted to the hospital wing by McGonagall, apparently the Dementor encounter had affected him severely. Interesting. The creatures seemed particularly drawn to him. She returned to her waiting place seconds before McGonagall reappeared with the nervous first years. Perfect timing. The sorting ceremony proceeded predictably until finally McGonagall announced, "This year, we're pleased to welcome a transfer student from the Nordic Institute of Magical Arts. Blackwood, Lyra." Lokia strode confidently to the stool, aware of the curious stares from the entire hall. A transfer student was apparently unusual enough to warrant attention. Perfect. The sorting hat dropped over her eyes, and immediately she felt its consciousness brush against her mental shields. Well, a small voice spoke in her ear. "In over 1,000 years, I've never encountered anything quite like you." Lokia smiled beneath the hat's brim. "I'd be disappointed if you had." "Not human at all, are you?" the hat mused. "Something much older, much more powerful." "I'd appreciate your discretion on that matter," Lokia thought firmly. "Consider it a professional courtesy between ancient magical artifacts." The hat chuckled. "Your secret is safe. Now, where to put you?" "With that mind and those ambitions, obviously Slytherin." The last word was shouted to the hall. Lokia removed the hat, noting with amusement that it gave her a small wink before she set it down. The Slytherin table applauded politely as she joined them, though she could sense their cautious assessment. Excellent. Slytherin would provide the perfect balance of access and privacy for her investigations. "Transfer students are rare," said a tall boy who introduced himself as Marcus Flint. "Especially into upper years." Lokia shrugged elegantly. "My family moved to Britain unexpectedly. Political considerations." She offered no further explanation, knowing that in Slytherin, hinting at mysterious connections would discourage rather than encourage further questions. During Dumbledore's welcome speech, Lokia studied the headmaster carefully. In person, his power was more evident than it had been through her viewing portals, layers of magic wrapped around him like invisible robes. Yet there was something else, a wrongness in his right hand, carefully concealed but detectable to her heightened senses. "He's injured. Or cursed." More importantly, she caught the moment his twinkling blue eyes passed over her with more attention than a new student should warrant. Good. She wanted him curious, not suspicious. Not yet. After the feast, Lokia followed her new housemates to the dungeon common room, mentally mapping the castle's layout. She'd need to know every secret passage and hidden corner if she was to conduct her investigation undetected. "What years are you taking?" asked a girl named Daphne Greengrass as they reached their dormitory. "Third-year core classes," Lokia replied. "With some additional independent study approved by the headmaster." This was true, in a way. She'd magically altered the school records to show this arrangement, though Dumbledore had never actually approved it. The falsehood would stand up to casual questioning but would give her an excuse to be anywhere in the castle at almost any time. "That's Potter's year," noted another Slytherin girl with a sneer. "You'll have to put up with his fame-seeking antics." Lokia feigned mild interest. "Harry Potter attends Hogwarts." "I'd heard rumors, of course." "Is he as exceptional as the stories suggest?" The ensuing complaints about Harry's undeserved fame, special treatment, and mediocre abilities told her exactly what she needed to know. Slytherin House was firmly anti-Harry, which meant her interest in him would need to appear academic rather than friendly, at least among her housemates. Perfect. She'd need a plausible cover for watching him anyway. Lokia spent her first week establishing her persona. In classes, she demonstrated advanced knowledge while carefully avoiding appearing superhuman. She cultivated acquaintances in Slytherin without forming close friendships that might lead to uncomfortable questions. And she observed Harry from a calculated distance, waiting for the right moment to approach. That moment came in defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin, who Lokia had quickly identified as a werewolf, though he clearly believed his condition well hidden, had organized a practical lesson with a boggart. Lokia watched with interest as students confronted the shapeshifter, revealing their deepest fears. When Harry stepped forward, Lupin intercepted him, clearly concerned about what form the boggart might take. Voldemort, perhaps. Or something worse. After class, Lokia deliberately bumped into Harry in the corridor, sending his books scattering. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, kneeling to help gather his things. "Completely my fault." "It's okay," Harry replied automatically, then noticed her Slytherin tie. His expression cooled slightly. Lokia pretended not to notice. "You're Harry Potter, aren't you?" "I'm Lyra Blackwood. New transfer." She extended her hand. Harry shook it hesitantly. "Nice to meet you. You're in Slytherin. Is that a problem?" Lokia asked, raising an eyebrow. "No. I mean," Harry looked embarrassed. "It's just unusual for Slytherins to be friendly." Lokia laughed. "I'm still learning the house rivalries. At my old school, we didn't have such divisions." She handed him his potions textbook. "That was an interesting defense lesson. I noticed Professor Lupin didn't let you face the boggart." Harry's expression shifted to surprise. "You noticed that?" "I notice lots of things," Lokia replied with a slight smile. "Like how our esteemed potions master seems to have a personal vendetta against you." Harry snorted. "That's putting it mildly." "Perhaps we could help each other," Lokia suggested. "I'm excellent at potions but struggling to understand all the British wizarding context that everyone else takes for granted. Maybe we could study together sometimes." The suspicion in Harry's eyes hadn't fully disappeared, but curiosity was replacing it. Why would a Slytherin want to study with a Gryffindor? "Because house rivalries are absurd when there's learning to be done," Lokia replied promptly. "Besides, I'm new. I don't have a decade of prejudice to overcome." Harry hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Library tomorrow after dinner." "Perfect," Lokia agreed. First contact established. Now to widen the circle. "She's a Slytherin," Ron hissed when Harry arrived at the library table with Lokia in tow the next evening. "Transfer student," Harry explained. "She's not like Malfoy and his lot." Hermione looked up from her enormous pile of books, studying Lokia with intense curiosity. "Which school did you transfer from?" "Nordic Institute of Magical Arts," Lokia replied, setting down her bag. "Small, private institution in northern Norway. You won't find it in Hogwarts, a history." "Why transfer to Hogwarts?" Hermione pressed, still looking suspicious. "Family relocation," Lokia answered smoothly. "My father's work brought us to Britain." Before Hermione could continue her interrogation, Lokia pulled out her potions textbook. "Harry mentioned you're both in his potions class. Is Professor Snape always so intense?" The question successfully diverted the conversation to safer topics. By the end of the study session, Ron had grudgingly accepted Lokia's presence, and Hermione had moved from suspicion to academic interest after Lokia demonstrated several advanced potion brewing techniques. Over the following weeks, Lokia gradually integrated herself into their study sessions, carefully cultivating a friendly but not intimate relationship. She presented herself as intellectually curious but politically neutral, interested in learning about Harry's adventures but not taking sides in the Gryffindor-Slytherin rivalry. "Is it true you produced a Patronus to drive away the Dementors at the Quidditch match?" she asked Harry after the disastrous game where he'd fallen from his broom. Harry looked embarrassed. "No, that was Dumbledore. I'm trying to learn the charm, though. Professor Lupin's teaching me." "Impressive," Lokia said sincerely. "That's well beyond OWL level magic." "You know about patron uses?" Harry asked. "Theoretically," Lokia replied. "We studied them at my old school, but practical application was reserved for older students." She paused thoughtfully. "Though I'd be curious to observe your lessons, if Professor Lupin wouldn't mind." Harry seemed surprised by her interest. "I could ask him." "But why would you want to?" Academic curiosity, Lokia said with a shrug. And, those creatures affected me on the train too. Not as severely as you, but enough that I'd like to learn the defense. This wasn't entirely false. While the Dementors couldn't actually harm her, their presence was unpleasant, like standing in a cold, dank mist. More importantly, joining these lessons would give her insight into Harry's connection to his parents' deaths, the memories the Dementors forced him to relive. To her surprise, Lupin agreed to her participation, though he watched her with cautious eyes during the sessions. The werewolf had good instincts, he sensed something unusual about her, even if he couldn't identify what. During these lessons, Lokia learned about the night Harry's parents died, about his mother's screams that the Dementors forced him to recall. She observed how Lupin spoke of James and Lily Potter with personal knowledge but carefully avoided mentioning Sirius Black despite his obvious connection to their story. Another piece of the puzzle. Another potential lie by omission. While establishing her position within Harry's circle, Lokia simultaneously pursued her investigation of Dumbledore. She placed subtle tracking charms on the gargoyle guarding his office, alerting her whenever the headmaster left for extended periods. During one such absence, she made her first attempt to access his private sanctuary. Cockroach clusters, she told the gargoyle, having overheard McGonagall use the password earlier that week. The statue moved aside, allowing her access to the spiral staircase. At the top, Lokia cast advanced detection spells before touching the door handle, identifying several alarm charms that would trigger if an unauthorized person entered. Amateur, she murmured, carefully disabling each without leaving a trace. For millennia-old wizard, Dumbledore's security was disappointingly conventional. Inside the office, Lokia worked quickly and methodically. She examined the curious silver instruments whirring on various tables, recognizing several as monitoring devices. One in particular drew her attention. It emitted a soft, steady pulse that she instinctively recognized as connected to Harry's magical signature. Monitoring his location. His health, she wondered aloud, studying the device without touching it. Or something else entirely. The portraits of former headmasters appeared to be sleeping, but Lokia wasn't fooled. She cast a subtle muffling charm around herself before continuing her exploration. Dumbledore's desk contained correspondence with various ministry officials, notes on school matters, and a drawer of what appeared to be reports on Harry's well-being at Privet Drive. Lokia scanned these quickly, confirming her suspicion that Dumbledore had always known about Harry's living conditions. A neighbor named Arabella Figg apparently provided regular updates. The boy appears underfed again this summer. The Dursleys continue to assign him excessive chores while their son receives preferential treatment. No signs of direct physical abuse, but the emotional neglect remains concerning. At the bottom of this particular report, Dumbledore had written in flowing script, regrettable but necessary. The blood protection remains paramount. Blood protection, Lokia muttered, filing away this information. Connected to his mother's sacrifice, no doubt. But necessary? Surely other arrangements could have been made. She turned her attention to the cabinet in the corner, which her magical senses identified as containing something far more valuable than paperwork. Inside, a stone basin filled with swirling, silvery substance gleamed in the dim light. A pensive, Lokia whispered, recognizing the memory viewing device from her research. Now we're getting somewhere. She hesitated briefly before touching the silver surface. Entering the headmaster's private memories was invasive even by her standards, but she reminded herself of the stakes. This man was orchestrating events around Harry's life, potentially putting him in danger for some greater plan. She had a right to know what that plan entailed. Taking a deep breath, Lokia plunged her face into the silvery substance. She found herself standing in a dimly lit room where a younger Dumbledore sat across from a wild-haired woman with enormous glasses. The woman was speaking in a harsh, rasping voice unlike her normal tones, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. The prophecy. The full prophecy that had set Voldemort hunting Harry's parents. Before Lokia could fully process the implications, the scene shifted. Now she stood in Dumbledore's office, watching as the headmaster examined a baby Harry, recently delivered after his parents' murder. Dumbledore was casting complex diagnostic spells over the lightning-shaped wound on the infant's forehead. "As I feared, memory," Dumbledore murmured. "A connection has been formed. A piece of him lives on in the boy." Lokia's breath caught. A piece of Voldemort living within Harry? What did that mean? The memory shifted again, showing a conversation between Dumbledore and Snape that confirmed the potion's master had been in love with Harry's mother and now protected her son out of guilt and lingering affection. Another piece of the puzzle that Harry knew nothing about. Scene after scene played out before her, Dumbledore arranging Harry's placement with the Dursleys despite McGonagall's protests, Dumbledore instructing staff to test Harry's abilities through carefully constructed challenges, Dumbledore discussing the Chamber of Secrets with the school ghosts, clearly having some knowledge of its contents before the attacks began. Confirmation of her suspicions, but also new revelations that were far more disturbing. Finally, the memories ejected her, and Lokia found herself back in Dumbledore's office, her mind racing. She quickly restored everything to its exact position, reactivated the alarms, and slipped out, making it back to the Slytherin common room just as her tracking charm alerted her to Dumbledore's return to the castle. That night, Lokia updated her list: Dumbledore's confirmed deceptions, the full prophecy and its implications for Harry's fate. The true nature of Harry's scar contains a piece of Voldemort, deliberate placement with abusive guardians despite alternatives, orchestrated tests of Harry's abilities and character, prior knowledge of the Chamber of Secrets, Snape's true motivations and connection to Lily Potter, monitoring Harry's abuse without intervention, manipulating events to shape Harry into a weapon against Voldemort, 8 concrete lies or omissions, with more implied. The picture emerging was troubling. Dumbledore was grooming Harry for some kind of final confrontation with Voldemort, one that potentially required his sacrifice. But why? Lokia whispered to herself in the darkness of her bed curtains. What does "neither can live while the other survives" truly mean? She needed more information. And for that, she needed to get closer to Harry. The opportunity arose when Harry began practicing the Patronus charm in earnest. During one session, when Lupin was called away to deal with a student incident, Harry asked Lokia if she wanted to try the spell herself. "I'm not sure I should," she hedged, knowing that any magic she performed would carry traces of her true nature. "Professor Lupin hasn't authorized me to practice, just observe." "Come on," Harry urged. "You've been watching for weeks. Don't you want to try?" The eagerness in his green eyes was difficult to resist. For a moment, Lokia was reminded that despite everything he'd experienced, Harry was still just a 13-year-old boy excited to share something he'd learned. "Very well," she agreed. "But if I set the castle on fire, I'm blaming you." Harry laughed. "It's not that kind of spell. You need a happy memory, the happiest you can think of. Focus on it, then say, expecto patronum." Lokia raised the wand she rarely used, a prop more than a tool for her kind of magic. She considered what memory to use. Most of her happiest moments involved successful mischief, but she suspected this spell required something pure. She thought of the moment she'd first discovered Harry, that small boy healing himself in a cupboard, unwittingly displaying magic that reminded her there were still wonders to discover in the universe. "Expecto patronum," she said softly. Silver light erupted from her wand, far more powerful than she'd intended. It coalesced into a large, gleaming shape, a wolf with distinctly serpentine features around its eyes and muzzle. The creature padded around the classroom before dissolving. Harry stared at her, wide-eyed. "That was, you did it on your first try." Lokia, equally surprised by the strength of the casting, quickly recovered. "Beginner's luck. And a very good teacher." She smiled at him. "You're quite talented, Harry." Most adults struggle with this charm. He blushed slightly at the praise. What memory did you use? If you don't mind my asking. Lokia considered her answer carefully. A moment when I discovered something extraordinary when I least expected it. Before Harry could question her further, Lupin returned. He glanced between them suspiciously, clearly sensing the lingering magic in the air. Did something happen while I was gone? He asked. Just talking theory, Professor, Lokia replied smoothly. Harry was explaining the importance of emotional focus. Lupin didn't look convinced, but he let the matter drop. As they packed up at the end of the lesson, he asked Harry to stay behind, giving Lokia a pointed look that clearly requested privacy. She left, but lingered outside the door, enhancing her hearing with a subtle spell. Harry, I don't want to tell you who you can be friends with, Lupin was saying, but Miss Blackwood, there's something not quite right about her. What do you mean? Harry asked, sounding defensive. I can't put my finger on it exactly, Lupin admitted. Just, be careful what you share with her. Some people have motivations that aren't immediately apparent. You think she's reporting to Malfoy or something? Harry asked skeptically. No, nothing like that. Lupin sighed. Just an old man's intuition, perhaps. Forget I mentioned it. Lokia moved away quickly before the door opened. Interesting. The werewolf's heightened senses were picking up her otherness, even if he couldn't identify it. She'd need to be more careful around him. But the incident had accomplished something important. Harry had defended her to Lupin, suggesting he was beginning to trust her. That trust would be essential for what came next. As winter turned to spring, Lokia continued her dual mission, befriending Harry while investigating Dumbledore. She made 2 more successful incursions into the headmaster's office, each yielding new information. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black, a former headmaster, nearly caught her during the second visit, forcing her to use a memory modification charm that she hoped wouldn't be detected. More concerning was Dumbledore himself, who began watching her with increased interest during meals in the Great Hall. Their paths crossed, coincidentally, in corridors with increasing frequency, and he had taken to asking her casual questions about her previous schooling that were clearly designed to test her backstory. The Nordic traditions of potion brewing are particularly fascinating, he remarked during one such encounter. Professor Eriksson was renowned for his innovations with Arctic ingredients. A test, there was no Professor Eriksson at her fictional former school. Lokia didn't hesitate. I'm afraid I never had the pleasure of his instruction, headmaster. Professor Nyberg headed our potions department during my attendance. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, but she detected calculation behind them. Ah, my mistake. Memory fails us all eventually. He knew she was lying. But he couldn't prove it, and he seemed curious rather than alarmed, for now. Meanwhile, her relationship with Harry, Ron, and Hermione deepened, particularly after she helped them research Buckbeak's defense for Hagrid. Her extensive knowledge of magical law, acquired during her preparation for this mission, proved invaluable, though ultimately unsuccessful against the Ministry's predetermined verdict. I don't understand why you're helping us, Ron said one evening in the library. No offense, but Slytherins don't usually care about magical creatures or Hagrid. I'm not Slytherins, I'm me, Lokia replied. And I dislike injustice. This was actually true. While Lokia had perpetrated plenty of mischief over the centuries, she had a peculiar moral code that bristled at powerful entities abusing their authority over weaker beings. Lucius Malfoy's manipulation of the Ministry to execute an innocent creature for his son's wounded pride offended her personal ethics. You're different, Hermione concluded, studying Lokia with renewed interest. I can't figure you out. Good, Lokia said with a grin. I prefer to remain enigmatic. As the end of term approached, tensions rose around Buckbeak's scheduled execution. Simultaneously, the castle buzzed with rumors about Sirius Black, who had allegedly infiltrated Gryffindor Tower. Lokia, who had been investigating Black's case separately, had reached the conclusion that he was likely innocent of betraying the Potters, though she hadn't yet found concrete proof. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione disappeared the evening of Buckbeak's execution, Lokia's tracking charm on Harry, placed weeks earlier as a precaution, activated. They were heading toward the Whomping Willow, and they weren't alone. Moving quickly, Lokia disillusioned herself and followed, arriving at the Shrieking Shack just in time to witness the confrontation between Black, Lupin, and Pettigrew. She watched from the shadows as the true story of the Potter's betrayal unfolded, confirming her suspicions about Black's innocence. When Snape arrived and threatened Black, Lokia faced a dilemma. Direct intervention would expose her, but Harry deserved to know the truth about his godfather. Before she could decide, Harry took matters into his own hands, disarming Snape. The situation deteriorated rapidly afterward. Pettigrew escaped, Lupin transformed into a werewolf, and Dementors descended on Black and Harry by the lake. Watching from a distance, Lokia saw Harry attempt to produce a Patronus to save himself and his godfather, only to fail as the creatures overwhelmed him. She was preparing to intervene, consequences be damned, when something extraordinary happened. A second Harry appeared on the opposite shore, casting a fully corporeal Patronus that drove away the Dementors. Time travel, Lokia whispered, recognizing the signs. Clever, Hermione. She followed the time-traveling Harry and Hermione as they rescued Buckbeak and then Black, marveling at the elegance of the solution. When they returned to the hospital wing just as Dumbledore locked the door behind their earlier selves, Lokia finally understood how the headmaster operated. He never directly broke rules or laws. He simply created circumstances where others would do so with his implicit blessing. Plausible deniability combined with manipulated outcomes, a strategy worthy of Lokia herself. The next morning, she visited Harry in the hospital wing after Ron and Hermione had left for breakfast. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting a chocolate frog on his bedside table. "I heard there was some excitement last night involving Sirius Black." Harry looked at her warily. "Just rumors. Nothing interesting happened." Lokia sat on the edge of the bed and lowered her voice. "Harry, I know about the Time Turner. I know about Sirius being innocent. And I know about Pettigrew." His face paled. "How could you possibly? I followed you," she admitted. "I was concerned when you all disappeared suddenly. I saw everything, though I stayed hidden to avoid complicating the situation." Harry stared at her for a long moment, then asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know you have an ally who understands the full picture," Lokia replied honestly. "And because I believe Dumbledore has been keeping too many secrets from you." Harry's expression hardened slightly. "Dumbledore saved Sirius last night. He told us how to use the Time Turner." "Yes, in this instance, his manipulations worked in your favor," Lokia acknowledged. "But have you wondered why Black never received a trial in the first place? Why Dumbledore, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, never insisted on due process for your parents' alleged betrayer?" The question clearly hadn't occurred to Harry before. "I don't know." "Neither do I," Lokia said. "But I intend to find out. There's a pattern emerging, Harry. And I'm concerned about where it leads." Harry studied her face carefully. "Why do you care? Why are you involved in any of this?" It was a fair question, one Lokia had anticipated. She gave him a version of the truth. "Because I recognize manipulation when I see it. I've experienced similar treatment myself. People using me as a piece in their game without explaining the rules." This wasn't entirely false. Odin had his own plans for his adopted daughter that he'd never fully disclosed. "I don't like seeing it happen to someone else." Harry seemed to accept this explanation. "So what now?" "Now," Lokia said, rising from the bed, "you focus on recovering. And I continue looking for answers." She paused at the door, turning back to him. "Harry, there's something important you should know. I believe your scar is more than just a curse mark. It's a connection to Voldemort, one that Dumbledore understands better than he's telling you." Harry's hand moved unconsciously to his forehead. "What kind of connection?" I don't know the full details yet, Lokia admitted. But I'm going to find out. With that promise, she left him to ponder her words, knowing she'd just irrevocably altered their relationship. She was no longer just a friendly study partner, she had positioned herself as an ally against potential manipulation, someone willing to tell Harry truths others withheld. It was a risky move. If Harry reported this conversation to Dumbledore, her investigation would be compromised. But she had judged his character carefully over months of observation. Harry Potter had a deep-seated distrust of authority figures who kept secrets from him, a natural response to his upbringing. He might not fully trust her yet, but he wouldn't immediately run to Dumbledore either. As the term ended and students prepared to board the Hogwarts Express, Lokia made one final visit to Dumbledore's office. The headmaster was away attending to ministry business following Black's escape, providing her last opportunity to search for answers before the summer break. This time, she bypassed the general office area and focused on a heavily warded cabinet she'd noticed during previous visits but hadn't had time to examine. The protections were formidable, but after centuries of breaking into Odin's vault, Lokia had developed techniques for dismantling even the most complex magical barriers. Inside the cabinet, she found a collection of small crystal vials, each containing silvery memory strands labeled in Dumbledore's precise handwriting. One in particular caught her attention, TMR, Horcruxes, most urgent. She removed this vial and emptied it into the pen sieve, then plunged her face into the swirling memories. What she witnessed chilled even her ancient soul. A teenage Tom Riddle, the boy who would become Voldemort, discussing the darkest of magic with a younger Professor Slughorn. Soul containers. Multiple soul containers. A path to conditional immortality through the most heinous acts imaginable. The scene shifted to Dumbledore examining a diary, the same diary that had possessed Ginny Weasley the previous year. He was performing complex diagnostic spells similar to those he'd used on baby Harry's scar. As I suspected, Memory Dumbledore murmured. A Horcrux. But not the only one, I fear. Another shift, and now Dumbledore stood before a strange stone basin, drinking an emerald potion while a shadowy companion urged him to continue. The memory was fragmented, as if Dumbledore himself hadn't been fully conscious, but Lokia caught glimpses of a locket being retrieved and replaced with a fake. The final memory showed Dumbledore in his office, pacing as he spoke to Fawkes the Phoenix. If my theory is correct, and I pray it is not, then Harry's scar contains a fragment of Voldemort's soul, inadvertently created the night James and Lily died. Not a true Horcrux, perhaps, but a soul fragment nonetheless. And if so? Dumbledore's expression was one of profound sadness. If so, the boy must die for Voldemort to be truly vanquished. There is no other way. The memory ended, throwing Lokia back into the physical office. She stood frozen beside the pen sieve, the implications of what she'd learned washing over her. Dumbledore believed Harry had to die to defeat Voldemort. All the manipulation, all the careful shaping of Harry's character and experiences, it was preparing him to sacrifice himself willingly when the time came. By the 9 realms, Lokia whispered, genuine horror filling her for perhaps the first time in centuries. She carefully returned the memory to its vial and restored all protective enchantments, then left the office, her mind racing. This was far worse than she'd suspected. The headmaster wasn't just manipulating a child for some abstract greater good, he was preparing him for slaughter. Back in her dormitory, Lokia updated her list one final time before leaving Hogwarts for the summer, Dumbledore's confirmed deceptions. The full prophecy requiring either Harry or Voldemort to die. Harry's scar contains a fragment of Voldemort's soul. Dumbledore believes Harry must die to defeat Voldemort completely. Voldemort created multiple Horcruxes ensuring his survival. Sirius Black's innocence was potentially known or suspected. The deliberate placement of Harry with abusive relatives to make him humble and grateful for the wizarding world. Orchestrated yearly tests of Harry's courage and moral character. Prior knowledge of the Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk. Snape's true loyalties and motivation, love for Lily Potter. Deliberate monitoring of Harry's abuse without intervention. The magical protections requiring Harry's suffering at the Dursleys. The existence of the Horcrux hunt and Dumbledore's injury. Obtaining 112 confirmed lies of omission or commission, with more likely to be uncovered. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was deeply troubling. Lokia made a decision. When school resumed in September, she would no longer simply investigate. She would actively work to counter Dumbledore's plans for Harry, not because she particularly cared about one human boy's fate, she told herself, but because the arrogance of the old wizard's machinations offended her on a fundamental level. No one should have their destiny decided for them without their knowledge or consent. Not even a mortal boy with a piece of a dark wizard's soul embedded in his forehead. Summer passed in a blur of preparation. Lokia divided her time between Midgard and Asgard, collecting resources she would need for the coming confrontation. In Asgard, she raided the ancient library for information on soul magic, earning suspicious glances from her mother Frigga, who nonetheless helped her locate several obscure texts without asking too many questions. "Whatever mischief you're planning," Frigga said as she handed Lokia a particularly ancient volume, "I sense it's not merely for your amusement this time." Lokia accepted the book with a small smile. "Is that approval I hear, Mother?" "Curiosity," Frigga corrected. "You've been distracted for years now. This is the first time you've seemed truly engaged in something beyond transient amusements." "Perhaps I'm finally maturing," Lokia suggested with mock solemnity. Frigga laughed. "The day you truly mature is the day Odin admits to a mistake. But whatever this pursuit is, it seems to give you purpose. That, at least, pleases me." On Midgard, Lokia maintained distant observation of Harry, who had returned to Privet Drive. The protections there prevented her from getting too close without potentially alerting Dumbledore, but she managed to establish a viewing portal in a nearby park where Harry sometimes walked alone. She noticed changes in him since the revelation about Sirius. He stood straighter, challenged his relatives more directly, and used the threat of his murderer godfather to improve his living conditions. Small rebellions, but significant for a boy who had spent most of his life in passive endurance. When news broke about the Quidditch World Cup being hosted in Britain, Lokia made arrangements to attend, suspecting Harry would be there. She was proven correct when she spotted him in the top box with the Weasley family and Hermione, though she maintained her distance, not wanting a coincidental meeting to seem too suspicious. The subsequent Death Eater attack and appearance of the Dark Mark confirmed her suspicions that Voldemort's followers were becoming more active. She noted with interest how Ministry officials immediately suspected Harry of conjuring the mark, despite the absurdity of such an accusation. The boy was developing political enemies at the highest levels, another complication in an already precarious situation. As September 1st approached, Lokia finalized her plans for the coming school year. She had 3 primary objectives: discover the remaining 5 of Dumbledore's 17 suspected lies, find a way to remove the soul fragment from Harry without killing him, prepare Harry to confront Dumbledore with the full truth. It would be a challenging undertaking, but Lokia had never shied away from complexity. If anything, the high stakes made the game more enthralling. This year, she told her reflection as she prepared to return to King's Cross, we move from observation to action. The announcement of the Triwizard Tournament upon their return to Hogwarts immediately set alarm bells ringing in Lokia's mind. A dangerous competition with a history of deaths, being reinstated the same year Harry Potter was of an age to potentially participate. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient for anyone wishing to place the boy in controlled danger once again. When Harry's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire despite the age restriction, Lokia wasn't surprised, merely disappointed by the predictability of it all. "I didn't put my name in," Harry insisted when she found him alone in a corridor after the selection. "I know," Lokia replied calmly. "The question is, who did? And why?" Harry looked relieved that she believed him, especially given Ron's public rejection and the widespread assumption he had somehow cheated. "Moody thinks someone wants me dead." "Possible," Lokia agreed. "But there are simpler ways to kill someone than entering them in a high-profile tournament under constant supervision." She tapped her fingers against her thigh thoughtfully. No, this feels like another test. Or perhaps a distraction. Distraction from what? Harry asked. That's what we need to find out. In the weeks that followed, Lokia divided her attention between helping Harry prepare for the tournament and continuing her investigation of Dumbledore. The headmaster, she noticed, was frequently absent from the castle, presumably continuing his hunt for Voldemort's Horcruxes. This provided her with more opportunities to access his office, though she was increasingly cautious about triggering the expanding security measures. After Harry's successful navigation of the first task, retrieving a golden egg from a nesting dragon, Lokia noted how Dumbledore watched the boy with a curious mixture of pride and sorrow. The expression confirmed her worst suspicions. The headmaster was genuinely fond of Harry, yet still intended to sacrifice him when the time came. He cares for you, in his way, she told Harry as they practiced spells in an empty classroom. That's what makes his deception all the more insidious. Harry, who had begun to cautiously accept Lokia's assertions about Dumbledore's manipulations, looked troubled. If he cares, why not just tell me the truth? I've faced Voldemort 3 times already. I'm not a child. Because the complete truth might change your choices, Lokia explained. And he needs you to make very specific choices when the time comes. She hadn't told Harry about the soul fragment or Dumbledore's belief that he needed to die. That revelation would come, but not until she had a potential solution to offer alongside it. The Yule Ball provided an unexpected opportunity for Lokia to observe the dynamics between the various players in this elaborate game. As Hogwarts, Durmstrang, and Beauxbatons students mingled, she noted how Karkaroff nervously avoided Snape, how Moody's magical eye never stopped scanning the crowd, and how Dumbledore watched it all with the benevolent expression of a chess master whose pieces were moving exactly as planned. Lokia herself attended with a 7th-year Slytherin who asked few questions and expected little conversation, allowing her to circulate freely. She danced once with Harry, who had survived his opening dance with Parvati Patil and now stood awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor. You look like you're planning an escape route, she teased, approaching him. Harry grimaced. That obvious? Only to someone who's watching, Lokia replied, extending her hand. One more dance before you flee. For appearance's sake. He accepted with visible relief, clearly more comfortable with her than with potential romantic partners. As they moved around the floor in a simple box step, Lokia took the opportunity to share what she'd learned about the golden egg clue. It's Mermish, she told him quietly. You need to listen to it underwater. Harry looked at her in surprise. How did you figure that out? Research, she said simply. An observation of the other champions. Cedric's been visiting the prefect's bathroom with his egg. 5th floor, 4th door from the statue of Boris the Bewildered. Passwords, Pine Fresh. Harry's steps faltered. You've been spying on Cedric. I've been gathering information, Lokia corrected. There's a difference. Before Harry could respond, the dance ended. Lokia squeezed his hand briefly. Just trying to level the playing field, Harry. The other champions have their headmasters helping them. You should have support too. After the ball, Lokia made another excursion to Dumbledore's office, this time focusing on his extensive collection of books rather than his personal memories. She was searching for information on Horcruxes and soul magic, hoping to find a way to remove Voldemort's fragment from Harry without killing him. The relevant texts were heavily worded, suggesting Dumbledore had anticipated someone might search for this specific information. Lokia carefully bypassed the protections and discovered several ancient volumes on soul transactions, magical parasites, and ritual exorcisms. One passage in particular caught her attention. While conventional wisdom holds that a Horcrux can only be destroyed by damaging its container beyond magical repair, theoretical exceptions exist for living vessels. If the fragment is improperly or accidentally implanted, rather than through the proper ritual, a correctly performed ritual of separation might extract it while leaving the host intact. However, such rituals typically require sacrifice equivalent to the intended preservation, commonly, another life. Lokia frowned. A life for a life. Not an ideal solution, but it suggested possibilities that Dumbledore had perhaps not explored, or had rejected as too morally questionable. She copied the relevant passages using a spell that transferred the text directly to a charmed journal, then carefully restored the books to their places and reactivated all protective spells. As she prepared to leave, however, a voice from the doorway froze her in place. "Finding everything you need, Miss Blackwood. Or should I say, whoever you really are." Dumbledore stood in the entrance, his blue eyes lacking their usual twinkle. Instead, they held the cold calculation of a strategist whose plans had been interfered with. Lokia straightened, abandoning the pretense of being caught off guard. "Headmaster. I was wondering when we'd have this conversation." "Indeed." Dumbledore entered the office fully, closing the door behind him. "I confess I've been curious how long you would continue your nocturnal explorations of my private library before we confronted the matter directly." He knew. Had likely known for some time. The realization wasn't entirely surprising, but it was disappointing. Lokia had hoped for more time. "You've been monitoring me," she stated. "Just as you've been monitoring Harry Potter since long before you officially met him," Dumbledore countered. He gestured to one of the silver instruments on a nearby table. "This one alerts me when my protective wards are dismantled with magic I don't recognize. And your magic, Miss Blackwood, is quite distinctive." Lokia nodded appreciatively. "Clever. Though not clever enough to stop me accessing what I needed." "I didn't try to stop you," Dumbledore said mildly. "I wanted to see what you were looking for. It tells me a great deal about your intentions." He moved to his desk and sat down, motioning for Lokia to take the chair opposite. After a moment's consideration, she complied. There was no point in fleeing, this confrontation was inevitable. "Soul magic," Dumbledore continued. "Specifically, methods for extracting soul fragments without destroying their containers. A fascinating research topic for a supposed transfer student. Just as preparing a child for sacrifice is a fascinating project for a supposed educator," Lokia replied coolly. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly on his wand. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," Lokia countered. "Voldemort created Horcruxes, multiple Horcruxes, anchoring himself to life regardless of what happens to his physical body. And the night he tried to kill Harry, he inadvertently created one more, embedding a piece of his soul in the boy's scar. By your calculation, Harry must die for Voldemort to be truly defeated." She leaned forward. "What I don't understand is why you never looked for alternatives. Why you've manipulated Harry since infancy to make him willing to walk to his death when the time comes." "There are no alternatives," Dumbledore said quietly. "Believe me, I have searched." "Have you?" Lokia raised an eyebrow. "Or have you searched only within the boundaries of what you consider morally acceptable?" "Because there are ways, Headmaster. Ways you've dismissed or overlooked." Dumbledore studied her with renewed intensity. "Who are you? What is your interest in Harry Potter?" Lokia considered how much to reveal. Full disclosure seemed premature, but some truth was necessary to establish her position. "I am someone who recognizes the pattern of a powerful figure manipulating others for what they deem the greater good," she said carefully. "Someone who objects to decisions being made about Harry's life without his knowledge or consent. And someone with resources beyond what you've considered in your search for solutions." "You haven't answered my question," Dumbledore noted. "Who are you, really?" Lokia smiled thinly. "Consider me a concerned third party. Neither aligned with you nor with Voldemort, but with my own interest in how this story unfolds." Dumbledore's expression remained impassive, but she could sense his mind working rapidly behind those twinkling blue eyes, reassessing everything he thought he knew about her. "You've been interfering with carefully laid plans spanning many years," he said finally. "Plans necessary for Voldemort's ultimate defeat. Whatever your intentions, you risk catastrophic consequences. Your plans require an innocent child to die," Lokia pointed out. I'm simply exploring alternatives that don't demand that particular sacrifice. And if no such alternatives exist? Dumbledore challenged. Would you condemn countless others to suffering under Voldemort's return to save one life? It was a fair question, and one Lokia had asked herself. The fate of one human boy, even one she'd grown unexpectedly fond of, shouldn't matter to a being of her age and power. Yet something about the calculated manipulation of Harry's entire existence offended her on a fundamental level. I reject the premise of your question, she replied. I believe alternatives do exist. And unlike you, I'm willing to explore options beyond conventional morality to find them. Dumbledore sighed deeply. I feared as much. Dark magic cannot be the answer, Miss Blackwood. The price is always too high. Says the man who already decided the price of one boy's life is acceptable, Lokia countered. Your moral high ground seems rather situational. They regarded each other in silence for a long moment, two powerful beings at an impasse. Finally, Dumbledore spoke again. What do you intend to tell Harry? Eventually. Everything, Lokia said. He deserves to know what's embedded in his scar. He deserves to know why you've shaped his life as you have. But not until I can offer him an alternative to your sacrificial plan. Dumbledore's expression darkened. I cannot allow you to interfere further. For the greater good, Lokia interrupted, a phrase that has justified countless atrocities throughout history. No, Headmaster. Your greater good isn't good enough for Harry Potter. She rose from the chair, magic crackling visibly around her fingers. I won't be leaving Hogwarts, and I won't stop helping Harry. You can accept that reality, or you can attempt to force me out. But I should warn you, I'm not what I appear to be, and you may find me more difficult to remove than you anticipate. Dumbledore also stood, his own power manifesting as a subtle pressure in the room. Is that a threat? Merely a statement of fact, Lokia replied calmly. We can work at cross purposes, or we can acknowledge that we both want Voldemort defeated and Harry to survive. The choice is yours. With that, she turned and walked to the door, half expecting to feel a spell hit her back. But Dumbledore merely watched her go, his expression unreadable. At the threshold, she paused. For what it's worth, I believe you do care for him. But caring isn't enough if your actions still lead to his destruction. She left without waiting for a response, her mind already racing ahead to her next moves. The confrontation had come sooner than expected, forcing her to accelerate her plans. Now that Dumbledore knew she was actively working against his strategy, he would take countermeasures. That night, Lokia added to her list, Dumbledore's confirmed deceptions, deliberately not seeking alternatives to Harry's sacrifice, monitoring Harry's growing relationships for potential interference with the greater good, using the Triwizard Tournament as another test of Harry's character and abilities, 3 more confirmed deceptions, bringing the total to 15. 2 remaining to complete her investigation. But now, with Dumbledore aware of her activities, finding those final pieces would be significantly more challenging. And more urgent than ever. The second task of the Triwizard Tournament provided an unexpected window into Dumbledore's methods. When Harry insisted on ensuring all hostages were safe, sacrificing his chance to win, Lokia observed the headmaster's reaction carefully. There was approval there, yes, but also calculation. Another box checked on Harry's development toward self-sacrifice. He's grooming you to put others before yourself in all circumstances, she told Harry afterward as they walked by the lake. An admirable quality in moderation, but dangerous when taken to extremes. Harry frowned. What's wrong with saving people who need help? Nothing inherently, Lokia acknowledged. But there's a difference between helping when you can and believing you must sacrifice yourself for every cause. She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Harry, what do you know about Horcruxes? His blank expression answered her question. Never heard of them. They're objects in which a person has concealed part of their soul, Lokia explained carefully. By splitting the soul through murder and dark magic, a wizard can achieve a form of immortality. If their body is destroyed, they remain tethered to life through these soul containers. Harry's eyes widened with dawning comprehension. You think Voldemort made one of these Horcruxes? Several, Lokia confirmed. It's how he survived when the killing curse rebounded off you. And it's what Dumbledore has been secretly hunting in his frequent absences from the school. She paused, weighing how much to reveal. Not everything, not yet. But enough to start preparing him. There's more to your connection with Voldemort than Dumbledore has told you, she continued carefully. Your scar, it's not just a curse mark. It's a connection to him, deeper than anyone has explained to you. Harry's hand moved unconsciously to his forehead. The dreams. The pain when he's near. That's why. Yes, Lokia confirmed. And it's why Dumbledore watches you so carefully. Why he tests you each year. He's preparing you for something, Harry. Something he hasn't been honest about. What? Harry asked, his voice barely audible. What is he preparing me for? Lokia placed her hands on his shoulders, meeting his eyes directly. I'm not entirely certain yet. But I promise you this, when I know everything, you'll know everything. No more secrets, no more manipulation. Just the truth, however difficult it might be. Harry studied her face for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me? It was a question she'd asked herself repeatedly. The answer remained elusive, even to her. Because no one should have their fate decided without their knowledge, she said finally. Because you deserve better than to be a piece on Dumbledore's chessboard. And because. She hesitated, surprising herself with the realization. Because I've come to care what happens to you, Harry Potter. The admission felt strange on her lips, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Caring about mortals was dangerous, they lived such brief, fragile lives. Yet somehow, this particular human had slipped past her defenses. Harry seemed equally surprised by her words, but before he could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mad-Eye Moody, his magical eye spinning wildly between them. Potter. Blackwood. His voice was gruff, suspicious. Interesting conversation. Just discussing the tournament, Professor, Lokia replied smoothly. Harry's ethical approach to the tasks is quite admirable. Moody grunted, clearly not believing her. Potter, Professor McGonagall wants to see you. Now. Harry glanced uncertainly at Lokia before nodding. Right. I'll head there now. As he walked away, Moody's magical eye remained fixed on Lokia. Funny thing about you, Blackwood. Can't quite get a read on what you are. Lokia raised an eyebrow. I'm a student, Professor. Nothing more mysterious than that. Moody took a swig from his flask. Dumbledore thinks otherwise. Says to keep an eye on you. He tapped his magical eye for emphasis. And this eye sees plenty. I'm sure it does, Lokia replied pleasantly. Though sometimes what we see isn't what's truly there. Moody's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. Philosophical for a teenager. But then, you're not really a teenager, are you? Before Lokia could respond, he stumped away, leaving her with the unsettling realization that Moody, or whoever was using his appearance, saw more than she'd anticipated. Another complication in an increasingly complex game. As the third task approached, tensions escalated on multiple fronts. Dumbledore increased security around his office, making further incursions nearly impossible. Moody watched Lokia's movements with suspicious intensity. And Harry's nightmares about Voldemort grew more frequent and detailed, suggesting the connection between them was strengthening. Meanwhile, Lokia pursued alternative research paths. She sent coded messages to contacts in the magical underworld, seeking information about soul magic that wouldn't be found in Hogwarts library. She explored the Chamber of Secrets, suspecting it might contain knowledge Salazar Slytherin had hidden from the other founders. And she continued to observe Dumbledore, looking for any clue about his ultimate strategy. 2 weeks before the third task, she made a breakthrough in the most unexpected place, the Room of Requirement. While searching for a secure location to practice potentially revealing magic, Lokia had discovered this remarkable space that transformed itself based on the user's needs. When she requested a place to learn about soul magic and Horcruxes, the room provided a collection of books so dark they hummed with malevolent energy. Among them was a volume titled Magic Most Evil, with a chapter on something called The Ritual of Soul Severance and Reunification. The ritual described a process for removing soul fragments without destroying their containers, precisely what she needed for Harry. But the cost was steep. The ritual required a willing sacrifice of equivalent value to the soul being saved. A life for a life, as the earlier text had suggested. But not necessarily a human life. The value was measured in magical potential rather than simple mortality. A theoretical possibility, Lokia murmured, copying the ritual details into her journal. But who or what would constitute an equivalent sacrifice? The answer came to her days later while watching Harry practice defensive spells for the third task. His Patronus, the stag that represented his father's animagus form, galloped around the classroom, radiantly powerful despite being produced by a 14-year-old wizard. "That's it," she whispered. Equivalent magical value. The Patronus charm was, in essence, a piece of the caster's soul given temporary form. A complete Patronus from a wizard of Voldemort's caliber would theoretically equal the fragment embedded in Harry's scar. If she could modify the ritual to accept a Patronus sacrifice instead of a life. It was theoretical, experimental, and wildly dangerous. But it offered a possibility Dumbledore had never considered. With this potential solution in development, Lokia felt ready to confront the final pieces of Dumbledore's deception. After months of investigation, she had identified 15 of his 17 suspected lies. The remaining 2 continued to elude her, until the night before the third task, when she finally managed to bypass Dumbledore's enhanced office security during his absence at a ministry meeting. This time, she headed directly for a specific memory vial she'd previously noted but not examined, Trelawney, Second Prophecy, June 1994. It had been added to the collection after her last successful incursion. In the pensive, she watched as Professor Trelawney entered a trance-like state during Harry's divination exam, speaking in the harsh voice of true prophecy, "It will happen tonight. The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned by his followers. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever he was. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will set out to rejoin his master." The memory shifted to Dumbledore in his office, writing rapidly in a journal. "The Second Prophecy is already in motion. Pettigrew has escaped and will undoubtedly seek out Voldemort. This accelerates our timeline considerably. The Triwizard Tournament next year provides an opportunity, a controlled environment where Harry's inevitable confrontation with Voldemort can be managed. Bagman and Crouch will need careful handling to ensure the proper events are included. The boy isn't ready, but prophecy waits for no one's convenience." Lokia pulled back from the memory, stunned by the implications. Dumbledore had known, had actively planned, for the Triwizard Tournament to be the vehicle for Voldemort's return. He had manipulated ministry officials to structure the tasks in ways that would make this possible. And he had done so knowing Harry wasn't ready. A final memory vial caught her attention as she prepared to leave. Grindelwald, Nurmengard visit, March 1995. Recent, then. And potentially revealing. In this memory, Dumbledore sat across from an aged wizard in a sparse prison cell. Grindelwald, the dark wizard Dumbledore had defeated decades earlier. "You've come about the boy," Grindelwald said without preamble. "The one with the scar." Dumbledore nodded. "I'm running out of options, Gellert. The fragment must be destroyed, but I cannot find a way to do so without killing him. Grindelwald laughed bitterly. Still trying to avoid the necessary sacrifices, Albus? Some prices must be paid. You know this. There must be another way, Dumbledore insisted. Some piece of forgotten magic we overlooked in our research. Our research. Grindelwald's eyes gleamed with old memories. For the greater good, yes. Isn't that what we once said? The few sacrificed for the many. Dumbledore's expression hardened. I abandoned that philosophy long ago. Did you? Grindelwald leaned forward. Or did you merely change how you defined the greater good? The boy dies, Voldemort dies, the world is saved. The equation remains the same, old friend. I had hoped you might offer actual assistance, Dumbledore said coldly, rising to leave. I've given you the only assistance that matters, Grindelwald replied. The truth you refuse to accept, some magic cannot be undone without equivalent sacrifice. The boy or the world, Albus. Choose. The memory ended, leaving Lokia with the final pieces of her puzzle. Dumbledore had sought alternatives, contrary to what she'd believed. He had even consulted his former enemy in desperation. But he had ultimately accepted the inevitability of Harry's sacrifice because he couldn't bring himself to consider options that violated his moral code. Dumbledore's confirmed deceptions, complete list, actively manipulating the Triwizard Tournament to facilitate Voldemort's return under controlled circumstances, consulting with Grindelwald about Harry's condition while concealing their prior relationship and collaboration, 17 lies, omissions, and manipulations, now fully documented. The complete picture was both simpler and more complex than Lokia had initially believed. Dumbledore wasn't evil, he genuinely cared for Harry and had sought alternatives to his death. But he was trapped by his own moral framework, unable to consider solutions that required ethically questionable magic. And so he had accepted the necessity of Harry's sacrifice, focusing instead on making that sacrifice meaningful and ensuring it would not be in vain. Lokia restored everything to its proper place and left the office, her mind made up. The time for investigation was over. Now came the confrontation. The morning of the third task dawned clear and bright, belying the darkness Lokia sensed gathering around Harry. She found him at breakfast, looking pale but determined. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Before the task. It's urgent. Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione, who were deep in conversation about last-minute spell practice. Now, Lokia confirmed. What I have to tell you can't wait any longer. They found an empty classroom near the Great Hall. Lokia sealed the door with multiple privacy charms before turning to Harry. Tonight, during the third task, someone is going to try to abduct you, she said bluntly. It's been planned for months, possibly the entire year. The Triwizard Tournament was manipulated specifically to create this opportunity. Harry stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Because I've seen Dumbledore's private memories, Lokia admitted. I've been investigating him since before I officially met you. And I've uncovered a web of manipulation that spans your entire life. She took a deep breath. Harry, there's a prophecy about you and Voldemort. It states that neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore has interpreted this to mean one of you must kill the other. I know there's some connection between us, Harry said slowly. My scar, the dreams. It's more than a connection, Lokia continued, knowing she had to tell him everything now. When Voldemort tried to kill you as a baby, something unprecedented happened. A piece of his soul broke off and attached to you, to your scar. You're carrying a fragment of Voldemort's soul, Harry. That's why you can speak Parseltongue, why you feel his emotions, why your wand is connected to his. Harry's face drained of color. I have a piece of him, inside me. Yes. It's called a Horcrux, a soul container. Voldemort made several deliberately, but you were an accident. And according to conventional magical knowledge, the only way to destroy a Horcrux is to damage its container beyond repair. Understanding dawned in Harry's eyes. Which means Dumbledore believes you must die for Voldemort to be truly defeated, Lokia finished gently. He's been preparing you for that sacrifice your entire life. The Dursleys, the yearly tests, the controlled exposure to danger, all designed to shape you into someone willing to die for the greater good when the time comes. Harry sat down heavily on a desk, his legs seemingly unable to support him. Dumbledore thinks I have to die. Yes, Lokia said. But I don't accept that conclusion. She knelt before him, taking his hands. Listen to me, Harry. I've found references to rituals that might separate the soul fragment without killing you. They're theoretical, dangerous, and involve magic Dumbledore would consider too dark to attempt. But they offer a possibility he's rejected. Why are you telling me this now? Harry asked, his voice shaking slightly. Right before the task. Because tonight is when Voldemort plans to return, Lokia explained. The task has been tampered with. Someone, I suspect Moody, who isn't really Moody, will try to ensure you reach the Triwizard Cup first. The cup will be a portkey to take you to Voldemort. And you want me to, what? Not compete? Tell Dumbledore. Lokia shook her head. Dumbledore knows. Not the specific details, perhaps, but he knows Voldemort will return soon. He's counting on it, in fact. It's part of his plan. She squeezed Harry's hands. What I want is for you to be prepared. To understand that you have choices beyond what Dumbledore has laid out for you. And to know that whatever happens tonight, I will find a way to free you from that soul fragment without sacrificing your life. Harry was silent for a long moment, processing everything she told him. Finally, he asked, why are you doing this? Really? It was the same question he'd asked before, but now Lokia felt ready to give a more honest answer. I've been watching you since you were 6 years old, she admitted. Not constantly, but regularly. I sensed your magic, unusual, powerful, and became curious. I saw you heal yourself in that cupboard. I saw you endure the Dursleys' treatment with a dignity no child should need to possess. I watched you enter the wizarding world and face challenges that would break most adults. She smiled slightly. I started watching out of curiosity. I continued out of admiration. And somewhere along the way, I began to care what happened to you. Not just as an interesting subject, but as a person who deserves better than to be sacrificed for someone else's idea of the greater good. Harry stared at her with new wariness. You've been watching me since I was 6. Who are you really? It was time for the truth, at least part of it. My name isn't Lyra Blackwood. I'm not a transfer student. I'm not even human, not as you understand the term. She allowed her appearance to shimmer briefly, revealing a glimpse of her true form, taller, otherworldly, with eyes that shifted between emerald and ice blue. Where I come from, I'm known as Lokia. Let's say I'm from a race your ancestors once worshipped as gods. Harry pulled his hands away, standing up. You've been lying to me this whole time. About my identity, yes, Lokia acknowledged, resuming her Lyra appearance. But not about Dumbledore's plans or my desire to help you. Everything I've told you about the Horcruxes, the prophecy, Dumbledore's manipulations, that's all true. How can I possibly believe that? Harry demanded. You just admitted you're not even human. Because I'm telling you now, when I don't have to, Lokia replied calmly. Because I could have continued my deception indefinitely, but I chose to be honest with you before tonight's events. And because, unlike Dumbledore, I believe you deserve to make informed choices about your own life. Harry paced the classroom, running his hands through his already messy hair. This is insane. All of it. Gods and Horcruxes and Dumbledore wanting me to die. I know it's overwhelming, Lokia said gently. But you needed to know before you enter that maze tonight. Knowledge is power, Harry. And you've been kept powerless through ignorance for too long. He stopped pacing, studying her with eyes that suddenly seemed older than his 14 years. "What do you want me to do?" "Be careful in the maze," Lokia said. "Stay alert for tampering or unusual assistance. If you do reach the cup first, be prepared for it to transport you somewhere. I'll be watching and will follow if that happens." "Follow? How?" Lokia smiled slightly. "I have abilities beyond what wizards consider possible. Trust that I can find you, whatever happens." Harry didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded slowly. "And after tonight? If I survive? Then we find a way to remove that soul fragment," Lokia promised. "Together. Without sacrificing your life in the process." She stood, preparing to remove the privacy charms. "One more thing, Harry. Dumbledore isn't evil. He genuinely cares for you and believes he's making the best of an impossible situation. His failure isn't one of intention, but of imagination. He can't conceive of solutions that fall outside his moral framework. Unlike you?" Harry asked pointedly. "Unlike me," Lokia agreed with a small smile. "I've never been constrained by conventional morality. Which makes me dangerous, yes, but also exactly what you need right now." She removed the charms and opened the door. "Good luck tonight, Harry Potter. Remember, whatever happens, you're not alone." As Harry walked away, visibly processing everything she'd told him, Lokia steeled herself for what was to come. The confrontation with Voldemort. The ritual she'd need to perform. And inevitably, the final confrontation with Dumbledore himself. The game was approaching its endgame. And she intended to rewrite its rules. The stands around the maze buzzed with excitement as the third task began. Lokia, seated among the Slytherins, watched Harry enter the maze with Cedric Diggory. Both boys disappeared into the towering hedges, swallowed by whatever challenges awaited inside. Dumbledore stood nearby, ostensibly monitoring the task but frequently glancing in Lokia's direction. Their silent battle of wills had intensified since their confrontation in his office, though neither had directly addressed the other since. As minutes stretched into hours with no sign of the champions, Lokia extended her senses beyond normal perception, trying to locate Harry within the maze. She detected disruptive magic at work, confundus charms, misdirection spells, and subtle manipulations guiding specific champions toward or away from the cup at the center. And then, abruptly, Harry's magical signature vanished completely. The portkey had activated. Lokia didn't hesitate. While the crowd remained oblivious, still watching the maze entrance for any sign of returning champions, she slipped away from the stands. In a secluded shadow beneath the Quidditch pitch, she opened a dimensional portal, not to the void space she typically traveled through, but directly to Harry's location, following the lingering trace of his magical signature. She emerged behind a weathered gravestone in an ancient cemetery. Voices carried through the mist, a high, cold voice giving instructions, and Pettigrew's nervous responses. Hidden by the stone, Lokia observed Harry bound to a marble headstone, bleeding from a cut on his arm as Pettigrew collected his blood in a vial. The ritual to restore Voldemort's body was already underway. Lokia assessed the situation rapidly. Intervening now would alert them to her presence, potentially putting Harry in greater danger before she could free him. Better to wait, observe, and act when the moment was optimal. The ritual proceeded with bone from Voldemort's father, flesh from Pettigrew, and blood from Harry, forcibly taken. Lokia watched as a skeletal figure emerged from the cauldron, pale and inhuman, yet radiating terrible power. Lord Voldemort, restored to physical form. Voldemort summoned his Death Eaters, who appeared in a circle around him. He tested his new body, taunted his followers for their disloyalty, and finally turned his attention to Harry. "I'm going to kill you, Harry Potter," he said softly. "After I have proven which of us is stronger. Untie him, Wormtail, and give him back his wand." This was the moment Lokia had been waiting for. As Pettigrew moved to untie Harry, she stepped out from behind the gravestone, her Lyra disguise falling away to reveal her true form. "I think not," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the graveyard. Every head turned toward her. Voldemort's red eyes narrowed in confusion and wariness. "What is this?" he demanded. "Another of Dumbledore's protections?" Lokia laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "I am no one's protection, least of all Dumbledore's." She walked forward, magic crackling visibly around her fingers. "Consider me an interested observer who's decided to intervene." Voldemort raised his wand. "Whatever you are, you've made a fatal mistake coming here." "Many have tried to kill me," Lokia replied conversationally, continuing to approach. "None have succeeded in, several thousand years." She flicked her wrist, and Harry's bindings dissolved. "Go to the cup, Harry," she instructed without taking her eyes off Voldemort. "It's still a portkey. It will take you back to Hogwarts. Seize the boy." Voldemort commanded his Death Eaters. "Kill the woman." Spells flew toward Lokia from multiple directions. With a contemptuous gesture, she froze them mid-air, the magical energy suspended like insects in amber. "Interesting," she mused, examining the frozen killing curses. "Your magic is impressive for mortals. But ultimately, limited." With another gesture, she sent the spells flying back toward their casters, forcing the Death Eaters to dive for cover. In the confusion, Harry scrambled toward Cedric Diggory's body, which lay forgotten near the Triwizard Cup. Voldemort himself cast a binding spell directly at Lokia, powerful, dark magic that would have immobilized any normal being. She allowed it to hit her, curious about its effects. The magic washed over her like water, momentarily outlining her form in dark energy before dissipating. "Disappointing," she commented. "I expected more from the wizard everyone fears." Rage contorted Voldemort's serpentine features. "What are you?" he hissed. "Someone beyond your comprehension," Lokia replied. "Someone who has decided that Harry Potter will not be your victim tonight." She turned to see Harry reach Cedric's body, his hand outstretched toward the cup. "Go, Harry," she called. Voldemort screamed in fury, sending a killing curse directly at Harry. Lokia moved faster than human eyes could track, intercepting the spell with her bare hand. The green energy crackled around her fingers before she crushed it into nothingness. "Your quarrel is with me now," she told Voldemort, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Let's see what you're truly capable of." As Harry's hand closed around the cup, disappearing with Cedric's body, Lokia unleashed a fraction of her true power. The graveyard erupted with emerald fire, forcing Voldemort and his Death Eaters back. The ground trembled beneath their feet as ancient magic, older than wizardry itself, responded to her call. "We'll meet again, Tom Riddle," she promised as she began to fade from view, opening a portal back to Hogwarts. "Sooner than you might wish." The last thing she saw before the dimensional rift closed was Voldemort's face contorted with fury and, more satisfyingly, fear. Chaos greeted Lokia when she emerged from her portal near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The tournament stands were in uproar. Harry had returned with Cedric's body, claiming Voldemort had returned and killed Diggory. Ministry officials were attempting to control the situation while Dumbledore tried to reach Harry, who was being hurried away by Professor Moody. That wasn't right. Moody should have been securing the area, not isolating the primary witness. Lokia followed at a distance, confirming her suspicion when Moody took Harry not to the hospital wing but to his private office. She reached the door just as Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Snape blasted it open, confronting the imposter. From the shadows, she watched as Dumbledore subdued the fake Moody, who was revealed to be Barty Crouch Jr. under Polyjuice Potion. The entire plot unfolded through Crouch's confession under Veritaserum, his escape from Azkaban, his impersonation of Moody, his manipulation of the tournament to deliver Harry to Voldemort. When the Ministry representatives arrived to take custody of Crouch, Lokia slipped away. Her confrontation with Dumbledore could wait until Harry was safe and the immediate crisis had passed. She found a secluded corner of the castle and reverted fully to her Lyra appearance, then made her way to the hospital wing. Dumbledore had stationed guards outside, but she had long since learned how to move through Hogwarts undetected when necessary. Inside, Harry lay in bed, surrounded by the Weasleys and Hermione. He looked exhausted but physically intact. When he spotted her in the doorway, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his face: relief, wariness, gratitude, and lingering shock from her revelation earlier that day. "Can I have a moment alone with Harry?" Lokia asked the gathered Weasleys. Mrs. Weasley looked ready to object, but Harry spoke first. "It's okay. Lyra's a friend." After they reluctantly filed out, Lokia approached Harry's bed, casting privacy charms around them. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "No," Harry answered honestly. "Cedric's dead. Voldemort's back. And I just found out one of my friends isn't human and has been watching me since I was a kid." He ran a hand through his hair. "So, definitely not all right." Lokia nodded, accepting his assessment. "That's fair. But you're alive, which is more than Voldemort intended." "Because of you," Harry acknowledged. "That was. I don't even know how to describe what you did in that graveyard." "A minor demonstration," Lokia said with a slight smile. "I was holding back considerably." Harry studied her face. "You weren't kidding about not being human, were you?" "No, I wasn't." Lokia sat on the edge of his bed. "But I meant everything else I told you. About Dumbledore's plans, about the Horcrux in your scar, about finding a way to remove it without killing you." Harry was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did you know Voldemort was going to return tonight? Is that why you finally told me everything?" "I suspected," Lokia admitted. "I found evidence that Dumbledore knew the tournament would be used for this purpose. He didn't know exactly how, but he expected Voldemort to return soon and was counting on it, in a way." "Because of the prophecy," Harry said quietly. "Because neither of us can live while the other survives." "That's Dumbledore's interpretation," Lokia corrected. "Prophecies are notoriously ambiguous. There could be other meanings." She leaned forward. "Harry, now that Voldemort has returned using your blood, things have changed. The ritual he used creates a new connection between you, one that might actually help us remove the soul fragment without killing you." Harry looked up sharply. "How?" "Blood magic creates bonds that run deeper than physical connection," Lokia explained. "By using your blood to regenerate his body, Voldemort has inadvertently tied his life force to yours in a new way. I believe we can use that connection to draw the soul fragment out of you and into another vessel for destruction." "What kind of vessel?" "That's what I'm still researching," Lokia admitted. "It needs to be something that can temporarily contain a soul fragment without being destroyed immediately. I have some ideas, but..." The hospital wing doors opened, and Dumbledore entered, his expression grave. He stopped when he saw Lokia sitting by Harry's bed. "Miss Blackwood," he said coldly. "Or should I use your true name?" "Either is fine," Lokia replied, rising from the bed but maintaining her privacy charms. "I assume you've been told about my intervention at the graveyard?" Harry mentioned assistance from an unexpected source, Dumbledore confirmed. Though he was understandably vague about details. He turned to Harry. "I need to speak with you privately. About what happened tonight, and about some larger truths that can no longer be delayed." Harry glanced between them, tension evident in his posture. "Anything you want to tell me, you can say in front of her. She's already told me about the prophecy. And the Horcruxes. And what's in my scar." Dumbledore's expression shifted to shock, then anger as he looked at Lokia. "You had no right," "He had every right to know," Lokia countered firmly. "It's his life, his soul, his future. The time for keeping him ignorant, for his own good, is over. You don't understand the consequences." "I understand perfectly," Lokia interrupted. "I understand you've been preparing him to die since he was an infant. I understand you placed him with abusive relatives to make him humble and malleable. I understand you've tested him year after year to ensure he'd walk willingly to his death when the time came. She stepped closer to Dumbledore, her voice lowering. What you don't understand, Headmaster, is that there are alternatives your moral framework hasn't allowed you to consider. Dumbledore's blue eyes had lost their twinkle entirely. Dark magic is not the answer. The price is always too high. Higher than Harry's life? Lokia challenged. Higher than his soul, Dumbledore replied gravely. Which is what your alternatives would risk. Harry's voice cut through their confrontation. Don't I get a say in this? They both turned to him, momentarily having forgotten his presence despite him being the subject of their argument. Of course you do, Harry, Dumbledore said gently. But you must understand the full implications. I understand that you've been lying to me, Harry interrupted, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. You've known what was in my scar all along. You've known I'd have to die to get rid of it. And you never told me. I wanted to protect you from that burden for as long as possible, Dumbledore explained. To give you some happiness before I had to sacrifice myself. Harry finished for him. That wasn't your choice to make. Dumbledore looked genuinely pained. Perhaps not. But I acted as I thought best, with the knowledge I had. And now there's new knowledge, Lokia interjected. Voldemort used Harry's blood in his resurrection ritual. That creates a magical connection that changes everything. For the first time, Dumbledore looked uncertain. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the blood tie creates a pathway, Lokia explained. One that might allow the soul fragment to be extracted without killing Harry. The blood that now flows in Voldemort's veins could serve as a bridge, pulling the fragment back toward its original source. Dumbledore's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. That's, theoretically possible. But the ritual required would be complex, dangerous, and beyond conventional wizarding morality, Lokia finished for him. Yes, I'm aware. But unlike you, I'm not constrained by such limitations. She turned to Harry. The choice is yours. Trust Dumbledore's path, which ends with your necessary sacrifice. Or trust me to find an alternative, even if that alternative involves magic that might be considered dark. Harry looked between them, the weight of the decision evident in his eyes. I don't want to die, he said finally. And I don't want to become like Voldemort either. If there's a third option, I want to try it. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. When he opened them, his gaze fixed on Lokia with new intensity. If you harm him, if your methods corrupt his soul, there will be nowhere in this universe you can hide from me. Dramatic, Lokia commented with a slight smile. But unnecessary. I have no intention of corrupting Harry. I merely intend to save him from your well-intentioned but ultimately fatal plans. She turned back to Harry. Rest now. We have time to develop the ritual properly. Voldemort has only just returned, he'll need to consolidate his power before making any major moves against you. Harry nodded, exhaustion finally overtaking him. As his eyes drifted closed, Lokia removed her privacy charms and gestured for Dumbledore to follow her from the hospital wing. In the corridor outside, she faced him directly. I know all 17 of your lies, Headmaster. From the full prophecy to your consultations with Grindelwald, from the blood wards to the soul fragment. I've seen your memories, read your notes, pieced together your grand strategy. Dumbledore's expression remained impassive. And what do you intend to do with this knowledge? I intend to give Harry choices you never offered him, Lokia replied. And I intend to show him that the binary you've presented, his life or Voldemort's permanent defeat, is a false one. You truly believe you can extract the Horcrux without killing him? Dumbledore asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his reserve. I do, Lokia confirmed. The blood connection creates possibilities that didn't exist before. And my unique perspective allows me to consider magical approaches you've dismissed as too dangerous or dark. She stepped closer. Work with me, Dumbledore. Your wisdom combined with my willingness to explore all options, together, we could save Harry and defeat Voldemort. For a moment, Dumbledore seemed to consider her offer. Then he shook his head slowly. I cannot endorse methods that risk Harry's soul, even to save his life. Some prices are too high. Then stay out of my way, Lokia said simply. Because I will find a solution, with or without your blessing. Dumbledore studied her for a long moment. What are you, really? No human which could have done what Harry described in that graveyard. Lokia smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I'm from a realm where what you call magic is woven into the very fabric of existence. Where beings like me are as far beyond wizards as wizards are beyond muggles. Gods, Dumbledore murmured. Or what humans once perceived as gods. A simplified explanation, but essentially correct, Lokia acknowledged. Though I prefer to avoid such grandiose labels. Dumbledore's expression turned grave. Why Harry? Why has a being of your power focused on one human boy? It was a question Lokia had asked herself repeatedly over the years. Her answer was more honest than she'd intended. Because he reminded me of myself, she admitted. Unwanted by his family. Different in ways they feared. Powerful beyond their understanding. And because watching him grow, watching him face challenges with courage and compassion, made me care. An unexpected development, I assure you. For the first time, something like understanding passed between them. We both want what's best for him, Dumbledore said quietly. We simply disagree on what that is. Then let him decide, Lokia proposed. Present all options, with their risks and benefits, and let Harry choose his own path. Isn't that what you've ultimately been preparing him for? To make the right choice when the moment comes? Dumbledore considered this, then nodded slowly. A fair proposal. But know this, I will be watching closely. If your methods threaten to corrupt him, I will intervene, regardless of the consequences. I would expect nothing less, Lokia replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ritual to design and 17 truths to explain to a remarkable young wizard who deserves to know them all. As she walked away, Lokia felt Dumbledore's eyes on her back. Their confrontation had ended in a stalemate, but the game had fundamentally changed. The path forward was unclear, filled with both peril and possibility. But one thing was certain, Harry Potter would no longer be kept in the dark about his own destiny. And with that knowledge came power that neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort had accounted for in their calculations. The power to choose. Chapter 3, The 17 Revelations. The summer after Voldemort's return passed in a blur of research, planning, and growing tension. Lokia divided her time between dimensions, collecting rare magical artifacts and ancient texts on soul magic that even Dumbledore couldn't access. Meanwhile, Harry remained at Privet Drive, protected by blood wards but isolated from most news of the wizarding world. Lokia visited him regularly, slipping past Dumbledore's guards with ease. The Order of the Phoenix members watching the house never detected her presence as she materialized directly in Harry's bedroom, bringing books, information, and most importantly, honest conversation. This is getting ridiculous, Harry said during one such visit in late July. He was sprawled across his bed, surrounded by parchment covered in ritual diagrams Lokia had brought him. I'm stuck here while Voldemort's out there rebuilding his army, and the Daily Prophet's calling me an attention-seeking liar. Lokia sat cross-legged on the floor, a rare grimoire open in her lap. Dumbledore believes isolation protects you. From what? The truth? Harry snorted. Fat lot of good that's done me so far. From making independent decisions, Lokia corrected. The longer you're kept in the dark, dependent on crumbs of information from trusted sources, the more likely you are to follow his plan when the time comes. Harry rolled onto his side to look at her directly. The weeks since term's end had changed him, there was a new sharpness in his gaze, a wary calculation that hadn't been there before. You really think that's deliberate? Not just him being overprotective? Both, Lokia said. His intentions aren't malicious, Harry. But his methods are manipulative, and the end result is the same, you, acting as he's designed you to act, without full awareness of your options. Harry was silent for a moment. Tell me more about the ritual. The one that could get this thing out of me without killing me. Lokia closed the grimoire. I found 3 potential approaches. The first uses Voldemort's blood connection to draw the fragment back to him. Elegant, but risky, it requires physical proximity to Voldemort. Hard pass, Harry muttered. The second uses a sympathetic vessel, creating a magical container so similar to you that the fragment transfers willingly, thinking it's still in you. Like what? A clone. More like a magical echo, Lokia explained. We'd need something deeply connected to you, blood, hair, a cherished possession, and significant power to make it convincing to the fragment. Harry frowned. And the third option? Lokia met his eyes. We create a temporary pathway through the void space between dimensions. The fragment passes through you into the void, where I can destroy it. This avoids the need for a permanent vessel, but... But what? But you'd be temporarily exposed to powers humans weren't meant to experience, she admitted. It would be uncomfortable. Harry laughed humorlessly. Uncomfortable. Right. And the risks? Madness. Death. Soul fragmentation of your own. Lokia shrugged. Or you might just have strange dreams for a few weeks. Great options, Harry said sarcastically. Die Dumbledore's way, risk madness your way, or live with a piece of Voldemort in my head forever. Lokia smiled slightly. I never said the choices would be easy, just that you deserve to make them yourself. Harry ran a hand through his already messy hair. How much longer before you know which ritual will work best? I need one more component, Lokia said. Something that exists in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic. A record of the full prophecy. Harry sat up straight. You mean I could actually hear it? The whole thing? That's the idea, Lokia confirmed. Dumbledore has only told you the parts he wants you to know. The actual prophecy might contain nuances he's overlooked or deliberately ignored. When can we go get it? Lokia raised an eyebrow. Patience, little wizard. The ministry is heavily guarded, and Voldemort wants that prophecy too. We need to be strategic. A tap at the window interrupted them, a delivery owl with the evening edition of the Daily Prophet. Harry let it in, paid the bird, and unfolded the paper. His face darkened as he read the headline. They're still at it, he growled, tossing the paper to Lokia. More hints that I'm unstable, that Cedric's death was some kind of accident. Lokia scanned the article. Fudge is afraid. He's using the prophet to discredit you and Dumbledore because acknowledging Voldemort's return would mean admitting his own failures. I don't care why he's doing it, Harry snapped. I care that everyone thinks I'm crazy or a liar. People believe what's comfortable, Lokia said, setting aside the paper. Truth rarely is. Harry paced the small bedroom, frustration radiating from him. I can't just sit here reading ancient texts while they tear apart my reputation and Voldemort builds his army. I need to do something. You are doing something, Lokia pointed out. You're preparing to remove the key weapon Voldemort doesn't even know he has against you. Harry stopped pacing. But that's just it, if this fragment in my scar is so important, why hasn't Voldemort figured it out? He was inside Quirrell's head for a year. Wouldn't he have sensed a piece of himself in me? It was a perceptive question, one that had bothered Lokia as well. I believe Dumbledore has concealed this information even from Voldemort. Perhaps through occlumency shields placed around you, or through the blood protection itself. More secrets, Harry muttered. Indeed, Lokia agreed. Which is why our first priority is getting that prophecy and uncovering the full truth. She stood, smoothing her casual Midgardian clothing. I should go. Dumbledore's order members change shifts soon, and the new one might have detection charms I haven't countered yet. Harry looked disappointed. When will you be back? 3 days, Lokia promised. With a plan for the ministry. She hesitated, then added, be careful with your letters. I suspect they're being monitored. By who? Dumbledore. And the ministry, Lokia confirmed. Maybe others. Harry's expression hardened. Good to know who my enemies are. Dumbledore isn't your enemy, Lokia corrected gently. He's just willing to sacrifice you for what he believes is right. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing, Harry muttered. Lokia smiled sadly. That's the problem with viewing the world in absolutes, Harry. People are rarely entirely good or entirely evil. They're just making choices based on incomplete information and personal values. Even Voldemort? Even him, Lokia confirmed. Though his values are particularly twisted and his information exceptionally incomplete. She moved to the window, preparing to depart. 3 days. Keep studying those diagrams. And Harry? She turned back to him. Remember that knowledge is protection. The more you understand about what's happening, the less power others have over you. With that, she shifted into the void space between dimensions, leaving Harry alone with his thoughts and a room full of forbidden knowledge. The Order of the Phoenix came for Harry 2 days later, moving him to their headquarters at 12, Grimmauld Place after a Dementor attack in Little Whinging nearly claimed his cousin's soul. Lokia, monitoring the situation from her dimensional vantage point, observed the rescue team with interest. Moody, Lupin, a metamorphmagus named Tonks, and several others, all following Dumbledore's orders to relocate Harry without telling him why. When she materialized in Harry's bedroom at Grimmauld Place the following night, she found him pacing again, his face flushed with anger. They've known where Sirius was hiding all along, he whispered furiously, careful not to wake Ron who slept in the adjacent bed. They've been having order meetings for weeks while I was stuck with the Dursleys getting no information at all. Lokia perched on his desk, watching him with sympathetic eyes. Another of Dumbledore's calculated decisions. Keeping you isolated until bringing you into the fold on his terms. I've got a disciplinary hearing at the ministry in a few days, Harry continued. For defending myself against Dementors that shouldn't have been anywhere near Privet Drive in the first place. And Dumbledore won't even look at me, let alone explain what's going on. He's avoiding you because he's afraid, Lokia said. That stopped Harry's pacing. Dumbledore? Afraid of me? Not of you specifically, Lokia clarified. Of your connection to Voldemort. He suspects the link between you is growing stronger, and he fears Voldemort might use it to see through your eyes, to access your thoughts. Harry's hand moved unconsciously to his scar. Could he? Potentially, Lokia admitted. The soul fragment creates a bridge. But it works both ways, Harry. You've had glimpses into his mind as well. The dreams, Harry murmured. I've been seeing a corridor, a door. The Department of Mysteries, Lokia confirmed. Where the prophecy is kept. Voldemort wants it too, but he can't retrieve it himself, only those named in a prophecy can remove it from the Hall of Prophecy. Harry sat heavily on his bed. So he needs me to get it for him. Or to manipulate you into retrieving it while his Death Eaters wait to take it, Lokia agreed. Which changes our plans somewhat. How so? Lokia smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. We're going to let him think his plan is working. After your hearing, we'll make our move, get the prophecy, implement the ritual, and deal with Dumbledore's deceptions once and for all. Harry studied her for a moment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The planning, the deception. I am a trickster god, after all, Lokia admitted with a shrug. Strategy and misdirection are my specialties. And what am I in all this? Harry asked quietly. Another pawn, just on a different board? The question struck Lokia more deeply than she expected. No, she said firmly. You're a player, not a piece. That's the fundamental difference between my approach and Dumbledore's. I'm giving you information, options, and letting you choose. He's decided your fate for you. Harry seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. Tell me about the hearing. What should I expect? Lokia spent the next hour briefing Harry on wizarding law, the structure of the Wizengamot, and Fudge's likely tactics. When Ron stirred in his sleep, she lowered her voice further. Dumbledore will represent you, she told him. Despite his distance lately, he won't abandon you to Fudge's machinations. But be prepared, the hearing is as much about discrediting Dumbledore as it is about punishing you. Politics, Harry said with distaste. Indeed, Lokia agreed. A game I've watched humans play for millennia, with remarkably little variation in the rules. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and Lokia tensed. Someone's coming. I should go. Wait, Harry whispered. The ritual, have you decided which one? Lokia hesitated. I'm leaning toward the void passage. It's the most direct, with the highest chance of success. And the highest risk, Harry noted. High risk, high reward, Lokia replied with a small smile. Story of your life, isn't it? Before Harry could respond, the doorknob turned. Lokia vanished instantly, slipping back into the void space as Hermione entered the room, looking concerned. Harry? Are you talking to someone? She whispered. From her dimensional vantage point, Lokia watched Harry lie smoothly to his friend, claiming he'd been rehearsing for his hearing. The ease with which deception now came to him was both impressive and slightly concerning. Dumbledore had shaped Harry to be brave and self-sacrificing. Lokia's influence was teaching him cunning and self-preservation. The question was, which set of lessons would define him in the end? Harry's hearing went exactly as Lokia had predicted. Fudge attempted to railroad him, Dumbledore arrived with a witness and legal precedent, and Harry was cleared of all charges. What interested Lokia most, observing from her dimensional window, was how Dumbledore continued to avoid direct eye contact with Harry, confirming her theory that he feared the connection to Voldemort. She waited until the night before Harry's return to Hogwarts to visit again, materializing in his room at Grimmauld Place well after midnight. Packed for tomorrow? She asked, startling him as he sorted through his trunk. Don't do that. Harry hissed, recovering from his shock. I could have hexed you. Lokia raised an eyebrow. I'd have liked to see you try. Harry snorted, returning to his packing. Did you see the hearing? I did. Dumbledore was effective, if cold. He still won't look at me, Harry confirmed, frustration evident in his voice. Won't explain why, either. We'll deal with that soon enough, Lokia promised. I've finalized our plan for the Department of Mysteries. We'll go during the first Hogsmeade weekend in October. Fewer students in the castle means fewer people to notice our absence. Harry looked up sharply. That's weeks away. Why wait so long? Several reasons, Lokia explained. First, security at the Ministry will be heightened immediately after your hearing. Second, we need time to prepare the ritual components. And third, I need you to learn occlumency. Occlumency? Mental shielding, Lokia clarified. Protection against Voldemort accessing your thoughts. I can teach you the basics, but you'll need to practice daily. Harry frowned. If I learn occlumency, won't that stop my visions of the Department of Mysteries corridor? Won't Voldemort get suspicious if the connection suddenly closes? Lokia smiled approvingly. Clever. Yes, that's a risk. We'll need to be selective, build walls around our plans while leaving him access to certain thoughts and dreams. Controlled vulnerability. Sounds complicated. It is, Lokia admitted. But necessary. The alternative is Voldemort potentially discovering our intentions regarding the Horcrux in your scar. That would be problematic. Harry abandoned his packing and sat on the bed, facing her. There's something I've been wondering. If Dumbledore knows about the fragment in my scar, and he thinks I have to die to destroy it, does that mean he's just waiting for the right moment? For me to face Voldemort and die? The question hung heavily in the air between them. Lokia chose her words carefully. I believe Dumbledore hopes you will face Voldemort, destroy all other Horcruxes, and then willingly sacrifice yourself, allowing Voldemort to kill you and thus destroy the soul fragment. After which, someone else would kill Voldemort in his newly mortal state. Harry looked ill. That's his great plan. I'm just the cleanup crew, removing the Horcruxes and then conveniently dying. Essentially, Lokia confirmed. Though he sees it as noble sacrifice rather than convenience. Who would kill Voldemort after I'm gone? Ron? Hermione? Most likely Dumbledore himself, Lokia said. Or perhaps Snape. Someone already positioned and prepared. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Why me? He asked finally, his voice smaller than usual. Out of everyone in the world, why did this have to happen to me? The vulnerability in the question touched something deep in Lokia, something she normally kept carefully buried beneath millennia of cynicism. Without thinking, she moved to sit beside him on the bed. Because the universe is fundamentally random and occasionally cruel, she said softly. Because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, born to the wrong parents in the wrong era. Because prophecies are self-fulfilling when powerful people believe in them. She hesitated, then added, and because you have the strength to bear it where others might break. Harry looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. That's surprisingly honest. You asked a sincere question, Lokia replied simply. It deserved a sincere answer. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence. Then Harry asked, what happens after? If we get this thing out of me and I don't have to die, what then? Then you live, Lokia said. You make choices based on what you want, not what prophecy or Dumbledore or destiny demands. You become the author of your own story. And Voldemort? Lokia shrugged. He remains a problem, certainly. But one you can face on more equal terms, without carrying a piece of him inside you. And you? Harry asked, watching her closely. What happens to you after all this? The question caught Lokia off guard. She hadn't thought much about what came after, her focus had been entirely on the challenge at hand. I suppose I return to my realm, she said slowly. Continue my various projects and occasional mischief. Why? Just wondering if gods make a habit of interfering in human affairs and then disappearing when things get boring, Harry said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Lokia laughed softly. Historically? Yes, that's exactly what we do. She studied his face, understanding dawning. You're worried I'll abandon you once the excitement is over. Harry looked away, embarrassed. Forget it. It's stupid. It's not stupid, Lokia countered. It's a reasonable concern based on your experiences. Adults have consistently failed you, parents who died, relatives who neglected you, teachers who couldn't protect you, a godfather who's legally unable to care for you, and a headmaster who's grooming you for sacrifice. She hesitated, then added quietly, I don't know what happens after, Harry. I'm not in the habit of making long-term commitments to humans. Your lives are so brief compared to mine. But I can promise you this, I won't simply vanish without explanation. Whatever comes next, you'll have a say in it. It wasn't the reassurance he wanted, she knew. But it was the truth, and after so many lies, she wouldn't insult him with comfortable falsehoods. Harry nodded, accepting her answer for what it was. I should finish packing. Train leaves early tomorrow. Lokia stood, recognizing the dismissal. I'll contact you at Hogwarts in a few days to begin occlumency training. In the meantime, start practicing clearing your mind before sleep. It's the foundation of mental protection. Right, Harry said, returning to his trunk. Clear my mind. With everything that's happening, should be easy. Lokia smiled at his sarcasm. Meditation helps. Focus on your breathing. Count backwards from 100. I'll try, he promised without much conviction. Lokia moved toward the center of the room, preparing to depart. Harry, she said suddenly, causing him to look up. For what it's worth, I believe you'll survive this. Not because of prophecy or destiny or even my intervention. But because you're remarkably difficult to kill. That startled a laugh out of him, a genuine sound that made him look momentarily like the teenager he was supposed to be, rather than the burdened young man he'd become. Thanks for the vote of confidence, he said, still smiling slightly. Lokia nodded once, then vanished back into the void space, leaving Harry to his packing and his thoughts. Hogwarts under Dolores Umbridge's influence was a far different place than it had been the previous year. Lokia, observing from her dimensional vantage point, watched with growing concern as the Ministry's stooge implemented increasingly restrictive educational decrees, targeted Harry specifically, and began systematically dismantling student freedoms. Their first occlumency session took place in the Room of Requirement, a week after term began. Harry arrived with a bleeding hand, punishment from Umbridge's blood quill. She's torturing students, he said without preamble as Lokia examined the words carved into his skin, I must not tell lies. This is barbaric, Lokia agreed, her eyes flashing dangerously. Even by medieval standards, blood quills were reserved for binding magical contracts, not punishment. Can you do something about it? Harry asked, watching as she traced a finger over the wounds, green magic sealing them temporarily. Lokia considered. I could turn her into a toad. Poetic, given her appearance. Tempting, Harry admitted with a small smile. But probably not helpful in the long run. Since when are you the voice of restraint? Lokia asked, raising an eyebrow. Harry shrugged. Since I realized we have bigger problems than one sadistic ministry employee. He flexed his hand, testing the healing. Thanks for this, by the way. It's temporary, Lokia warned. The magic in that quill is designed to prevent healing. I've dulled the pain and closed the wounds, but they'll reopen eventually. Better than nothing, Harry said. He looked around the Room of Requirement had created for their session, a Spartan space with two comfortable chairs facing each other and walls lined with strange symbols. So, occlumency. Lokia nodded, taking one of the chairs and gesturing for him to take the other. Mental defense is both simpler and more complex than most wizards believe. Your people tend to overcomplicate the process with rigid techniques and exercises. Let me guess, you have a better way? Harry said, sitting across from her. Naturally, Lokia replied with a smirk. Fundamentally, occlumency is about control of your thoughts, your emotions, your mental landscape. But control doesn't mean suppression or emptiness. Snape keeps telling me to empty my mind, Harry noted. Lokia snorted. Of course he does. That's like telling someone not to think about pink elephants, immediately counterproductive. She leaned forward. Instead, I want you to fill your mind. Create a mental architecture so detailed, so comprehensive that an intruder gets lost in it. What, like a building? If that works for you, Lokia confirmed. Or a landscape, a city, a forest, anything with complexity and depth. The key is to know every inch of it intimately while an invader doesn't. Harry considered this. So instead of trying to push Voldemort out, you lead him in circles, Lokia finished. Show him what you want him to see while keeping your true thoughts elsewhere. That, actually makes sense, Harry said, looking surprised. Why doesn't Snape teach it this way? Because most wizards are taught occlumency as a purely defensive discipline, shields and barriers, Lokia explained. I'm teaching you something closer to misdirection and illusion. Less direct resistance, more strategic manipulation. More your style than his, Harry observed with a small smile. Precisely, Lokia agreed. Now, close your eyes and start building your mental landscape. Make it somewhere you know well, somewhere with emotional significance. For the next hour, Lokia guided Harry through the creation of his mental architecture. He chose Hogwarts itself, a place he knew intimately, with countless rooms, passages, and secrets where thoughts could be hidden. By the session's end, he had constructed a basic framework and understood the principle. Practice every night, Lokia instructed as they prepared to leave. Add details, rooms, textures. The more real it feels to you, the more convincing it will be to an intruder. How will I know if it's working? Harry asked. We'll test it next session, Lokia promised. I'll attempt to access your mind, and you'll practice guiding me away from sensitive thoughts. Harry nodded, looking determined. When will we go after the prophecy? First Hogsmeade weekend, Lokia confirmed. We'll need an alibi for your absence. Perhaps your friends could cover for you. Harry hesitated. I haven't told Ron and Hermione about any of this. About you, the Horcrux, Dumbledore's plans. Lokia studied him curiously. Why not? Because. He struggled to articulate his reasoning. Because they still trust Dumbledore completely. Because they might think I'm crazy. Because I'm not sure how to explain that I'm working with a literal god who's been watching me since I was 6. All fair points, Lokia acknowledged. Though you may need their help eventually. I know, Harry sighed. Just, not yet. Your choice, Lokia said. But you'll need someone to cover for your absence when we visit the Ministry. Harry thought for a moment. I'll figure something out. Maybe tell them I'm staying behind to avoid Umbridge. Plausible, Lokia agreed. Now go, it's nearly curfew, and the last thing we need is you in another detention with that sadistic bureaucrat. Harry moved to the door but paused before leaving. Lokia? Thanks. For all of this. She nodded once, acknowledging his gratitude without dwelling on it. After he left, she remained in the room of requirement, reflecting on the changes in Harry since she'd revealed herself to him. He was more cautious now, more strategic. Less impulsively Gryffindor, more thoughtfully pragmatic. The influence of a trickster god, perhaps. Or simply the natural evolution of a young man learning that the world was more complicated than he'd been led to believe. Either way, he was becoming someone who might not only survive Voldemort but thrive in the aftermath. Assuming, of course, they successfully removed the soul fragment without killing him or driving him mad. A significant assumption, even for a god. The weeks leading to the Hogsmeade weekend passed in a blur of occlumency sessions, ritual preparations, and increasing tension within Hogwarts. Umbridge's reign of terror expanded. She was named High Inquisitor, given power to evaluate teachers, and implemented ever more restrictive educational decrees. In response, Harry and his friends formed Dumbledore's army, a secret defense group Lokia observed with approval, recognizing the strategic value of preparing students for the coming conflict. 2 days before their planned ministry excursion, Lokia was supervising Harry's final occlumency test in the room of requirement when he suddenly doubled over, clutching his scar. He's angry, Harry gasped, eyes squeezed shut in pain. Really angry. Something's gone wrong. Lokia crouched beside him, placing a cooling hand on his forehead. Don't block it, she instructed. Guide it. Use your mental architecture. Show him the surface thoughts while protecting the depths. Harry nodded, face contorted in concentration. Slowly, the pain seemed to recede. He wanted something done, he said finally, opening his eyes. Something retrieved. And whoever was supposed to do it failed. The prophecy, Lokia surmised. He's growing impatient. There's more, Harry added, looking troubled. I think he's planning to use me somehow. I got the impression of a trap, or bait. As we suspected, Lokia said thoughtfully. He'll try to lure you to the Department of Mysteries to retrieve the prophecy for him. Which is exactly what we're planning to do anyway, Harry pointed out. With one crucial difference, Lokia countered. We're aware of the trap. And we'll spring it on our terms, not his. Harry rubbed his scar, which had faded to a dull throb. My occlumency worked, I think. I was able to direct the vision, focus on parts of it while hiding others. Good, Lokia said approvingly. You're learning quickly. Had a good teacher, Harry replied with a small smile. One who actually explains things instead of just barking orders and rooting through my memories. Lokia acknowledged the compliment with a nod. Are you ready for the ministry? Our window of opportunity is narrow. If Voldemort's growing impatient, security may increase. I'm ready, Harry confirmed. I've told Ron and Hermione I'm staying behind to work on essays. They think it's about avoiding Umbridge in Hogsmeade. And they believe that? Harry shrugged. Hermione was suspicious, but she's been so busy with the DA and keeping Ron's prefect status from going to his head that she didn't push it. Good, Lokia said. Saturday, then. Meet me here at 9 after breakfast. We'll travel directly to the ministry. How exactly are we getting there? Harry asked. Flu powder. Apparition. Lokia smiled enigmatically. My way. Through the spaces between worlds. Harry looked both nervous and intrigued. Is it safe for humans? Mostly, Lokia replied, which didn't appear to reassure him. I'll shield you from the worst effects. You might experience some disorientation, perhaps mild hallucinations, but nothing permanent. Comforting, Harry muttered sarcastically. Lokia stood, preparing to depart. One last thing. Bring your invisibility cloak. If we encounter resistance, it may prove useful. Harry nodded. Saturday at 9. I'll be ready. As Lokia slipped back into the void space, she reflected on the accelerating timeline. Voldemort's impatience might work in their favor, creating distraction and urgency that would mask their true purpose. But it also increased the risk of confrontation, something she was prepared for, but Harry might not be. Not yet. But soon. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Harry arrived at the room of requirement precisely at 9, invisibility cloak tucked under his arm and a determined expression on his face. Lokia was waiting, dressed in her Asgardian armor rather than her Hogwarts uniform, green and black leather with golden accents, designed for both mobility and protection. Whoa, Harry said, taking in her transformed appearance. That's different. My true aspect, Lokia explained. Or close enough. Are you ready? Harry nodded, pulling out his wand. What's the plan once we get there? The Hall of Prophecy is on the 9th level of the Department of Mysteries, Lokia explained. We enter, retrieve your prophecy, and exit before anyone realizes we're there. If we encounter resistance, I'll handle it. And after we get the prophecy? We return here to perform the ritual, Lokia said. I've already prepared the necessary components. She gestured to a small leather pouch at her hip. The prophecy itself is the final piece. Why do we need the prophecy for the ritual? Harry asked, frowning. Prophecies contain powerful magic, fate magic, Lokia explained. By incorporating it into the ritual, we can potentially redirect your fate, altering the connection between you and Voldemort in ways that will facilitate removing the soul fragment. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was close enough. The prophecy would indeed help power the ritual, but Lokia's primary motivation for retrieving it was to reveal Dumbledore's first and most significant deception, the full content of the prophecy that had shaped Harry's entire life. Makes sense, Harry said, accepting her explanation. So, how do we travel your way? Lokia stepped into the center of the room and extended her hand. Take my hand and don't let go. The void space isn't meant for humans. I'll create a protective bubble around you, but stay close. Harry took her hand, his grip firm despite the nervousness in his eyes. Lokia closed her eyes, focusing her power, and with a fluid motion of her free hand, tore open the fabric of reality. A shimmering portal appeared before them, a window into swirling, iridescent chaos. Don't look directly at anything, Lokia warned. Focus on me, not our surroundings. With that, she stepped forward, pulling Harry through the portal. The void space enveloped them immediately, a rushing, disorienting blur of light, color, and impossible geometries. Harry gasped beside her, his grip tightening painfully on her hand as his mind struggled to process what it was seeing. Lokia wrapped her magic around him, creating a buffer between his consciousness and the raw chaos of the between worlds. Almost there, she assured him, navigating the currents of the void with practiced ease. She focused on their destination, the Ministry of Magic, specifically the entrance to the Department of Mysteries, and the void space responded, bending around her will. With another gesture, she opened an exit portal, and they stepped through into a dark, circular room with identical doors spaced evenly around its circumference. The moment they were through, the portal sealed behind them, leaving no trace of their unusual method of entry. Harry stumbled slightly, blinking rapidly as his senses readjusted to normal reality. That was intense, he managed, looking slightly pale. You did well, Lokia said approvingly. Most humans would be catatonic after such exposure. Lucky me, Harry muttered, straightening up and looking around. Where are we exactly? The entrance chamber to the Department of Mysteries, Lokia explained. It's designed to confuse intruders. When those doors close, the room will spin, making it impossible to know which door leads where. How do we find the Hall of Prophecy? Lokia smiled. We ask. She raised her voice slightly. We seek the Hall of Prophecy. One of the identical black doors clicked and swung open. Harry looked impressed. That was easy. The department responds to clear intent, Lokia explained. The confusion is meant for those who don't know exactly what they're looking for. They moved through the open door into a vast, cathedral-like room filled with towering shelves. Each shelf held countless small glass orbs, glowing with a faint inner light. The silence was absolute, dust motes floating in the dim illumination cast by the prophecies themselves. Stay close, Lokia murmured. The prophecies are organized by subject and date. Yours will be in the section for the early 1980s. They moved silently through the rows, following signs etched into the ends of shelves. Harry suddenly stopped, pointing ahead. Look, he whispered. Row 97. That's the corridor for my dreams. Lokia nodded. Voldemort has been drawing you here specifically. Your prophecy must be in this row. They advanced cautiously, scanning the dusty shelves until Harry suddenly pointed. There. On a shelf at about eye level sat a glass sphere with his name clearly marked on the yellowing label, SPT to APWBD Dark Lord and Harry Potter. SPT must be Sybil Trelawney, Lokia murmured. And APWBD is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry reached for the prophecy, then hesitated, looking at Lokia. Any magical protections I should know about before touching it? Only those named in a prophecy can remove it from the shelf, Lokia replied. Anyone else would trigger alarms and probably suffer mental damage. But you're safe to take it. Harry nodded and carefully lifted the glass orb from its stand. Nothing dramatic happened, no alarms, no magical backlash. The prophecy glowed slightly brighter in his hand, responding to his touch. I thought it would be bigger somehow, Harry said, staring at the swirling mist inside the sphere. Something this important, that shaped my whole life. The most significant forces often come in deceptively small packages, Lokia observed. Like soul fragments in scars. Harry nodded grimly, tucking the prophecy carefully into his pocket. So now a cold, drawling voice interrupted from the end of the row. Hand over the prophecy, Potter, and no one needs to get hurt. They spun to find Lucius Malfoy emerging from the shadows, his pale pointed face visible beneath his Death Eater mask. Behind him, more dark figures appeared, surrounding them on all sides. Death Eaters, Harry whispered, drawing his wand. Indeed, Malfoy confirmed, his own wand raised. Now, the prophecy, if you please. Lokia stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Harry. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Lucius. We have other plans for it. Malfoy's eyes narrowed, taking in Lokia's unusual appearance. And who might you be? You're not one of the Potter boys' usual school friends. No, Lokia agreed pleasantly. I'm something quite different. She turned her head slightly toward Harry without taking her eyes off the Death Eaters. When I move, run for the door. Don't stop, don't look back. I'm not leaving you, Harry protested quietly. You're not, Lokia assured him. You're following the plan. I'll find you. Before Harry could argue further, she acted. With a swift, fluid motion, she conjured daggers of green energy and sent them flying toward the Death Eaters, forcing them to dive for cover. Simultaneously, she created a blinding flash of light that filled the entire hall. Now, she shouted to Harry. In the confusion, Harry bolted, ducking between shelves as spells erupted around him. Lokia engaged the Death Eaters directly, her magic manifesting in ways they'd never encountered, shields that absorbed their curses, illusions that multiplied her form, and counterattacks that sent them flying into the prophecy shelves. Glass spheres shattered around them, ghostly figures rising to deliver prophecies no one was listening to, their voices creating a cacophony of overlapping predictions. Lokia fought with controlled precision, creating chaos without killing. These were mortals after all, however misguided. Death at her hands would attract attention from entities she preferred to avoid. When she was certain Harry had escaped the Hall of Prophecy, she created one final illusion, multiple copies of herself running in different directions, and slipped into the void space, tracking Harry's movement through the department. She emerged in a room with a stone archway on a raised dais, the death chamber, housing the veil between life and death. Harry was there, cornered by Bellatrix Lestrange, who looked demented with glee as she advanced on him. Give it to me, Bellatrix crooned, her wand pointed at Harry's chest. Give me the prophecy, little baby Potter. I don't think so, Lokia said, materializing behind her. Bellatrix whirled, but not fast enough. Lokia's hand closed around her wand arm, squeezing until the witch dropped her wand with a cry of pain. You're interrupting a private retrieval operation, Lokia said conversationally, as though discussing the weather. How rude. What are you? Bellatrix hissed, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fanaticism. Something your master should fear, Lokia replied, before flinging the witch across the room with casual strength. Bellatrix hit the wall hard and slumped to the floor, momentarily stunned. We need to go, Lokia told Harry. More are coming. Harry nodded, the prophecy still secure in his pocket. How do we get out? My way, Lokia said, grabbing his hand and tearing open another portal. Just before they stepped through, the chamber doors burst open. Dumbledore stood there, radiating power, his wand raised. His eyes met Lokia's across the room, surprise, recognition, and anger flashing across his face in rapid succession. Lokia smiled, offered a mocking salute, and pulled Harry through the portal, closing it behind them before Dumbledore could intervene. The void space swirled around them once more, but this time Harry seemed better prepared for the disorientation. When they emerged in the room of requirement, he stumbled only slightly before regaining his balance. Dumbledore was there, he said immediately. He saw us leave. I know, Lokia replied, already moving to prepare the ritual space. He'll come looking for you. We don't have much time. The room had transformed in their absence, sensing the new purpose. A circular area was marked on the floor with ancient runes, surrounded by 7 black candles. A stone basin similar to a pensieve but carved with unfamiliar symbols sat in the center. The ritual, Harry realized, watching as Lokia quickly lit the candles with a gesture. We're doing it now. We must, Lokia confirmed. Dumbledore will try to stop us once he realizes what we're doing. Harry pulled the prophecy from his pocket, looking at it uncertainty. Shouldn't we listen to this first? Before using it in the ritual? Lokia paused in her preparations. Yes, she agreed after a moment. You should hear it before we proceed. It's your right. Harry nodded and held up the glass orb. After a moment's hesitation, he smashed it against the floor. Instead of glass shards, a pearly white figure formed above the broken pieces, Professor Trelawney, rotating slowly, her eyes magnified behind her glasses. She spoke in the harsh, hoarse voice Lokia recognized from Dumbledore's memory, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies. The figure sank back into the fragments of glass and vanished. Silence filled the room as Harry processed what he'd heard. That's it, he said finally. That's what everyone's been fighting over. It doesn't even tell us anything useful. It tells us plenty, Lokia countered, resuming her ritual preparations. It confirms you have power the Dark Lord knows not, though it doesn't specify what that power is. It establishes that you're the only one who can truly defeat him. And most importantly, it's ambiguous about what neither can live while the other survives actually means. Dumbledore interpreted it to mean one of us has to kill the other, Harry said bitterly. Dumbledore chose the interpretation that fit his understanding of Horcruxes, Lokia corrected. But prophecies are slippery things, Harry. They often mean exactly what they say, but rarely what we think they say. What's your interpretation, then? Harry challenged. Lokia paused, considering the wording carefully. Neither can live while the other survives could mean many things. Perhaps that neither of you can truly live a full life while connected. Perhaps that the soul fragment in your scar prevents both of you from being whole. She gestured to the ritual circle. Which is exactly what we're about to address. Are you ready? Harry looked at the elaborate setup with apprehension. What exactly will happen? You'll sit in the center, Lokia explained, continuing her preparations. I'll use the prophecy's power, combined with my own magic and several ancient artifacts, to create a temporary pathway between you and the void space. The soul fragment will be drawn out through this passage, where I can isolate and destroy it. And the risks? You mentioned madness, death. Those remain possibilities, Lokia acknowledged candidly. But I've refined the process. The exposure will be brief, controlled. And I'll be guiding the fragment every step of the way. Harry took a deep breath, then nodded. Let's do it, then. Before Dumbledore finds us. Lokia gestured to the center of the circle. Sit there, cross-legged if possible. And Harry? She met his eyes directly. Whatever happens, whatever you feel or see, don't move from that spot until I tell you it's safe. The consequences could be severe. Harry nodded grimly and moved to the center of the circle, sitting as instructed. Lokia began arranging the remaining components, placing fragments of the prophecy orb in the stone basin, adding several glowing crystals from her pouch, and finally, drawing a small amount of blood from her own palm to mix with the other elements. God blood, she explained, seeing Harry's questioning look. Powerful binding agent. When everything was in place, Lokia took a position at the edge of the circle, directly in front of Harry. This will hurt, she warned. There's no avoiding that. But it will hurt him more. Harry's jaw set determinedly. I'm ready. Lokia nodded once, then began to chant in a language Harry couldn't possibly understand, ancient Asgardian, predating even Old Norse. Her hands wove complex patterns in the air, green energy trailing from her fingertips to form a web around the ritual circle. The candles flared higher, their flames turning emerald green. The runes on the floor began to glow with the same light, pulsing in rhythm with Lokia's chanting. The stone basin in front of Harry bubbled and smoked, the mixture inside turning black as void space itself. Harry gasped as pain shot through his scar, not the familiar burning of Voldemort's emotions, but something deeper, as though something were pulling at his very being. He gripped his knees tightly, fighting the urge to flee as the pain intensified. Lokia's chanting grew louder, more insistent. The green energy web tightened, focusing on Harry's scar. Sweat beaded on her forehead. This ritual taxed even her considerable powers, bridging worlds in ways few entities could manage. "I can see it," she said suddenly, switching to English. "The fragment. It's fighting, but it can't hide." Her eyes had changed, glowing with an inner light that seemed to see beyond physical reality. "Harry, this is the moment. It will be worse now. Hold on." With a gesture of both hands, Lokia created a shimmering tear in reality directly above Harry's head. The void space became visible to him, a swirling maelstrom of colors and shapes that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. The pain in his scar became unbearable, a screaming agony that felt like his skull was being split open. "Out," Lokia commanded, her voice resonating with power. "Out of him, fragment of Tom Riddle. You do not belong." Something black and oily began to seep from Harry's scar, not blood, but something more viscous, more fundamentally wrong. It writhed as it emerged, as though fighting against the extraction. Harry screamed, unable to contain the pain any longer, but remained fixed in place as instructed. The door to the room of requirement burst open. Dumbledore stood in the entrance, his wand raised, power radiating from him in palpable waves. "Stop this immediately," he commanded. "You don't know what forces you're tampering with." Lokia didn't turn, her focus entirely on the extraction. "Stay back, Dumbledore. Interrupt now and you'll kill him for certain." The black substance continued to pull free from Harry's scar, stretching like taffy as it was drawn toward the tear in reality. It seemed to scream without sound, a psychic wail of rage and fear that resonated in their minds rather than their ears. Dumbledore moved to the edge of the circle but did not cross it, recognizing the delicate balance of energies at work. "This is reckless," he said, but made no move to physically intervene. "Sometimes recklessness is required," Lokia replied through gritted teeth, maintaining her focus on the extraction. "Something you've forgotten in your cautious old age." The last of the black substance finally pulled free from Harry's scar. He slumped forward, barely conscious but still seated in the center of the circle. The fragment hovered in the air, caught between Harry and the void portal, twisting and contorting as it sought escape. "Into the void," Lokia commanded, making a pulling gesture with both hands. "Where you can harm no one." With a final, silent scream, the fragment was sucked into the shimmering tear. Lokia immediately sealed the portal with a slashing motion, cutting off the fragment from returning. The green flames extinguished themselves, the runes stopped glowing, and the ritual circle went dark. For a moment, complete silence filled the room. Then Harry raised a trembling hand to his forehead, touching his scar with disbelief. It's gone," he whispered. "I can't feel it anymore." Lokia approached him cautiously, her own energy visibly depleted by the ritual. She knelt before him, examining his scar with eyes that still glowed with otherworldly perception. "Clean," she confirmed, satisfaction evident in her voice. "The fragment is gone. Trapped in the void where even Voldemort cannot reach it." "Impossible," Dumbledore breathed, approaching slowly. "The Horcrux cannot be removed without destroying its container." "All my research was limited by your moral constraints and conventional magical understanding," Lokia interrupted, rising to face him. "I accessed options you wouldn't consider, Dumbledore. And I succeeded where you presumed failure was inevitable." Harry stood shakily, supported by Lokia's steady hand on his arm. He looked at Dumbledore, and for the first time, felt no reflexive respect or awe, only the bitter taste of betrayal. "You knew," he said quietly. "All these years, you knew I had a piece of him inside me. You knew I'd have to die to get rid of it. And you never told me." Dumbledore's expression was pained. "Harry, I wanted to spare you that burden until it became necessary. Spare me?" Harry's voice rose. You were raising me like a pig for slaughter. Training me, testing me, making sure I'd walk to my death willingly when the time came. It was the only way, Dumbledore insisted. Every path I explored led to the same conclusion. Because you wouldn't look beyond your narrow definition of acceptable magic, Lokia interjected. Your moral framework became a cage, headmaster. One that would have cost Harry his life. Harry took a step forward, green eyes blazing with anger. Tell me the truth. All of it. Now. Dumbledore looked between Harry and Lokia, seeming to age before their eyes. What has she told you? Everything, Harry replied. About the prophecy. About the Horcruxes. About your plan for me to die. About all 17 of your lies. He turned to Lokia. Show him the list. Let him try to deny it. Lokia produced her crystal sphere, activating it with a touch. The list appeared, hovering in the air between them, Dumbledore's confirmed deceptions, the full prophecy and its implications for Harry's fate. The true nature of Harry's scar contains a piece of Voldemort, deliberate placement with abusive guardians despite alternatives, orchestrated tests of Harry's abilities and character, prior knowledge of the Chamber of Secrets, Snape's true motivations and connection to Lily Potter, monitoring Harry's abuse without intervention, manipulating events to shape Harry into a weapon against Voldemort, deliberately not seeking alternatives to Harry's sacrifice, monitoring Harry's relationships for potential interference, using the Triwizard Tournament as another test, deliberately not investigating Sirius Black's case, hiding the existence of the other Horcruxes, concealing his terminal condition from the cursed ring, withholding Harry's family legacy and lordship status, actively manipulating the Triwizard Tournament to facilitate Voldemort's return. Consulting with Grindelwald about Harry's condition. Dumbledore stared at the list, his blue eyes no longer twinkling. You've been thorough, he said finally, his voice heavy. Deny it, Harry challenged. Tell me any of it is false. I cannot, Dumbledore admitted quietly. Though context would provide a different perspective on many of these points. Context? Harry laughed bitterly. What context justifies planning my death? Leaving me with people who hated me? Testing me year after year like some lab rat? The greater good, Dumbledore said, though he no longer seemed convinced by his own justification. Voldemort's defeat required sacrifices. My sacrifice, Harry interrupted. Not yours. Never yours. Lokia watched this confrontation with quiet satisfaction. The truth was finally emerging, painful but necessary. Harry deserved this moment of reckoning after years of manipulation. Harry, Dumbledore tried again. Everything I did was to prepare you for what I believed was inevitable. I searched for alternatives, not hard enough, Lokia cut in. You consulted Grindelwald but wouldn't consider soul magic outside your moral comfort zone. Your adherence to your personal ethics mattered more than Harry's life. Dumbledore turned to her, anger finally breaking through his composed facade. And what price will he pay for your intervention? What consequences have you unleashed by tampering with forces beyond mortal understanding? None, Lokia replied confidently. The fragment is gone, trapped between worlds where it can harm no one. Harry is free of its influence. And Voldemort remains unaware that one of his soul anchors has been neutralized. You can't know that with certainty, Dumbledore insisted. Actually, I can, Lokia countered. I've existed for millennia, Dumbledore. I understand void space and soul magic far better than any human wizard, however talented. The fragment is contained, and Harry is whole. Harry stepped forward, placing himself physically between them. Enough. This isn't about who has the superior magical knowledge. He turned to Dumbledore. This is about trust. You had none in me. You decided my fate without my consent. You manipulated my entire life toward a sacrificial end. The headmaster's shoulders slumped slightly. I did what I believed necessary. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps. Harry repeated incredulously. Definitely, Dumbledore amended, looking suddenly very old and very tired. I was wrong, Harry. In my focus on defeating Voldemort, I lost sight of the individual cost. Of your right to choose your own path. It was as close to an apology as Dumbledore was likely to offer. Harry seemed to recognize this, his posture relaxing slightly though his expression remained hard. What happens now? He asked. With Voldemort still out there? With the other Horcruxes? Dumbledore glanced at Lokia, then back to Harry. That, I think, is for you to decide. You've made it clear you no longer wish to follow my guidance. I don't trust your guidance, Harry corrected. But I still want Voldemort defeated. I still want to protect my friends, the school, the wizarding world. That hasn't changed. Lokia stepped forward. There's a middle path. Dumbledore has knowledge of the remaining Horcruxes that we need. We have methods he lacks for handling them safely. A collaboration, with Harry making the final decisions. Harry considered this, then nodded slowly. I could work with that. If, he added, looking pointedly at Dumbledore, there are no more secrets. No more manipulations. Complete transparency. Dumbledore hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with ceding control. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Complete transparency. Though I reserve the right to offer my counsel, even when it differs from what you wish to hear. Fair enough, Harry agreed. Lokia observed this negotiation with approval. Harry was asserting himself, claiming agency over his own fate while recognizing the value of Dumbledore's knowledge. It was a maturity beyond his years, perhaps accelerated by recent revelations, or perhaps always present but suppressed by circumstances. So, Harry said, looking between them. Where do we start? With the remaining Horcruxes, Dumbledore replied. There are several we must locate and destroy before Voldemort can be truly defeated. Including the one you're dying from, Harry stated bluntly, gesturing to Dumbledore's blackened hand, which the headmaster had been carefully concealing. Dumbledore looked startled, then resigned. Yes. A ring belonging to Voldemort's maternal family. I made a mistake in handling it. How long? Lokia asked quietly. A year, perhaps less, Dumbledore admitted. The curse is contained for now, but spreading steadily. Harry absorbed this information with surprising calm. Then we'd better move quickly. What are the other Horcruxes, and where do we find them? As Dumbledore began explaining his research and suspicions about the remaining soul containers, Lokia observed the shifting dynamics with satisfaction. The balance of power had fundamentally changed. Dumbledore was no longer the omniscient chess master moving pieces according to his grand design. Harry was no longer the sacrificial pawn, ignorant of his true purpose. And she was no longer merely an observer. She had become part of this story, this battle between wizards that had unexpectedly captured her interest and, more surprisingly, her concern. The god of mischief, helping to save a human boy from a fate others had deemed inevitable. Her brother Thor would laugh himself breathless if he knew. Over the following weeks, an uneasy alliance formed between the three of them. Dumbledore shared everything he knew about Voldemort's Horcruxes, the diary, already destroyed, the ring, destroyed but at great cost, the locket, the cup, something of Ravenclaw's, and potentially Voldemort's snake. With Harry's soul fragment now eliminated as well, they had a clear path forward. Umbridge's reign of terror at Hogwarts continued, but seemed less significant in light of their larger mission. Harry maintained his leadership of Dumbledore's army, now with renewed purpose. He was no longer just teaching defense, but preparing his friends for what he knew would be a real war. Lokia continued to visit regularly, though she maintained a lower profile now that Dumbledore was aware of her activities. Their ritual had changed something fundamental in Harry, not just removing the soul fragment, but altering his magical signature in subtle ways that only Lokia could detect. He seemed more focused, more intuitive with his spell work, and remarkably, his scar had faded from angry red to a pale silver line. Your magic is no longer fighting the fragment, she explained when Harry noted the changes. It's entirely yours now, uncontaminated. They were in the room of requirement, which had become their regular meeting place. Dumbledore was absent, dealing with increasing ministry pressure and his own deteriorating condition. "It feels different," Harry admitted. "Cleaner somehow. And I haven't had a single vision since the ritual." "The connection is severed," Lokia confirmed. "Though Voldemort doesn't know it yet. He still believes he can access your mind or plant false visions." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "Which gives us an advantage. He thinks he knows what I'll do, how I'll react. But he's working with outdated information." "Exactly," Lokia said with approval. "Always useful when your enemy underestimates you." Harry was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What happens when this is over? If we destroy all the Horcruxes and defeat Voldemort?" "Then you live," Lokia replied simply. "You finish school, choose a career, pursue whatever future appeals to you. Without prophecy or soul fragments dictating your path." "And you?" Harry asked, watching her carefully. "Do you just go back to wherever you came from? Return to being a god or whatever?" The question echoed their earlier conversation, but this time, Lokia had given it more thought. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I've become rather invested in this world, in ways I didn't anticipate. It would be interesting to see how the story continues." Harry smiled slightly. "That's not really an answer." "No," Lokia agreed. "But it's the truth. I don't know what comes next, Harry. For either of us. And perhaps that's as it should be. The future unwritten, choices unmade." "I'd like you to stay," Harry said quietly. "At least for a while. You're the only one who's ever been completely honest with me." Lokia felt an unexpected warmth at his words. "Well," she said lightly, "I am the god of lies, so that's rather ironic." "Maybe," Harry shrugged. "Or maybe it takes someone who understands deception to truly value honesty." Before Lokia could respond, the door to the room opened, and Dumbledore entered. He looked worse than ever, his blackened hand now almost completely useless, his face gaunt with pain he tried to conceal. "We have a lead on the locket," he said without preamble. "I believe I've located the cave where Voldemort hid it." Harry straightened immediately. "When do we go?" "We don't," Dumbledore corrected. "I will go, alone." "It's too dangerous." "No," Harry interrupted firmly. "No more solo missions, no more secrets. We agreed to transparency and collaboration." "I'm coming with you." Dumbledore sighed. "Harry, the protections around the Horcrux will be extremely dangerous. I cannot in good conscience expose you to such risk." "That's not your decision anymore," Harry replied calmly. "Either we go together, as a team, or I'll find the cave myself." Lokia watched this exchange with quiet pride. Harry was standing his ground, asserting his agency in ways he never would have before their intervention. "I could accompany them," she offered. "Additional protection, different magical perspective. 3 approaches are better than 1 when dealing with unknown defenses." Dumbledore considered this, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. We'll go together. Tomorrow night. The cave is remote, accessible only by sea. Be prepared for dark magic unlike anything you've encountered before." "When and where should we meet?" Harry asked. "My office, 8 o'clock, Dumbledore replied. "And Harry? Tell no one where you're going. Not even Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger. Secrecy remains essential." After Dumbledore left, Harry turned to Lokia. "Do you think the locket is really there? Or is this another test?" "I think the Horcrux is his primary concern now," Lokia replied thoughtfully. "With his time running out, Dumbledore is focused on eliminating as many soul fragments as possible before he dies." Harry nodded, accepting this assessment. "I should prepare. Defensive spells, healing potions, who knows what we'll face in that cave." "Indeed," Lokia agreed. "And Harry?" Despite our new arrangement with Dumbledore, stay alert. Old habits die hard, especially for someone who's spent decades playing chess with human lives. Trust but verify, Harry said with a grim smile. Lesson learned. The cave expedition proved even more harrowing than anticipated. Blood magic to enter, an underground lake filled with inferi, and a basin of poison that had to be consumed to reach the Horcrux. Dumbledore insisted on drinking the potion himself, suffering terribly as Harry forced cup after cup down his throat. And after all that, they discovered a fake, a locket containing not Voldemort's soul fragment but a note from someone identified only as R.A.B., who had stolen the real Horcrux years before. All for nothing, Harry said bitterly as they returned to Hogwarts, supporting a severely weakened Dumbledore. Lokia had remained outside the cave's inner chamber at Dumbledore's insistence, guarding their escape route. Not nothing, Lokia countered, examining the fake locket. This gives us new information. Someone else knew about the Horcruxes. Someone who opposed Voldemort from within his ranks. R.A.B., Harry repeated. Who could that be? Before they could speculate further, they spotted the dark mark hovering over Hogwarts. Death Eaters had somehow breached the school's defenses during their absence. What followed was chaos, fighting through the corridors, discovering Death Eaters had entered through a vanishing cabinet Draco Malfoy had repaired, and the ultimate confrontation on the astronomy tower where, despite their new alliance, they couldn't prevent the inevitable. Snape killed Dumbledore. It happened too quickly for intervention, Dumbledore immobilizing Harry under his invisibility cloak, Malfoy disarming the weakened headmaster, other Death Eaters arriving, and finally Snape delivering the killing curse that sent Dumbledore plummeting from the tower. In the aftermath, as the school mourned and the wizarding world reeled from the loss of their greatest protector, Harry, Ron, and Hermione gathered in the empty dormitory. Lokia had finally been introduced to Harry's friends, though the complete truth of her nature remained undisclosed. They knew only that she was a powerful ally who had been helping Harry privately. The locket, Harry said suddenly, looking at the fake Horcrux they'd retrieved. R.A.B., Regulus Arcturus Black. Sirius's brother. The Death Eater who changed his mind, Hermione breathed. It could be. If that's true, Ron added, then the real Horcrux might be at Grimmauld Place. Harry nodded grimly. And with Dumbledore gone, it's up to us to find it. To find all of them. Lokia, perched by the window, studied the three friends with newfound respect. They were so young, yet preparing to shoulder a burden that would crush most adults. You don't have to do this alone, she reminded Harry. I'm still here. Harry offered a small, grateful smile. I know. And we'll need your help. But some parts of this journey, I think we need to do ourselves. For Dumbledore. For everyone Voldemort has hurt. Lokia understood. This was Harry claiming his own story, making his own choices, exactly what she had hoped for when she first revealed Dumbledore's manipulations. Very well, she agreed. I'll help where I can, when you ask. But the path is yours to choose now, Harry Potter. He nodded, determination replacing grief in his green eyes. We finish what Dumbledore started. We find the Horcruxes, we destroy them, and then we end Voldemort. Not because prophecy demands it or because someone's pulling our strings. But because it's right. As Ron and Hermione voiced their agreement, Lokia felt an unfamiliar sensation, pride untainted by mischief or manipulation. Pride in this young human who had faced truth after painful truth and emerged stronger, more determined, more authentically himself. She had entered his life out of curiosity, remained out of principle, and now found herself invested in his future out of something dangerously close to affection. Not the maternal sort, gods made terrible parents, as her own experience proved, but something more akin to respect between equals, despite their vastly different natures and ages. Whatever came next, the Horcrux hunt, the inevitable confrontation with Voldemort, the rebuilding that would follow, Harry would face it on his own terms, with his own strength, making choices based on complete information rather than calculated half-truths. The trickster goddess had revealed the lies, but Harry Potter had forged his own truth from their ashes. And in doing so, he had changed not only his own fate but hers as well. Perhaps the most unexpected trick of all. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.